Molyneux's question. Imagine a man who has been blind since birth. He's lived his whole life guided by sound, touch, and spatial awareness, born not from sight, but from contact. He has come to recognize shapes with his hands. A cube feels different from a sphere, a triangle from a cylinder. He knows these forms deeply through sensation, through the press of angles and the smoothness of curves. Now imagine that modern medicine offers him a miracle. His vision is restored. Light floods his eyes for the first time. He sees the world, truly sees it. And now comes the question, posed centuries ago by the philosopher William Molyneux. If you showed him the cube and the sphere without letting him touch them, would he know which was? Molyneux's question is not just about vision. It is about perception, knowledge, and the architecture of the mind. It's about how we come to know what we know. Do we have an innate ability to connect sensory input across modalities? Or is every form of perception a separate language, one that must be learned through direct experience? Molyneux asked this question in a letter to the philosopher John Locke in 1688, and it has echoed ever since, because behind it lies the deeper inquiry. Is the mind a blank slate, or does it come equipped with certain built-in understandings? The newly sighted man, upon seeing the objects for the first time, might not recognize them. The cube and the sphere, once so familiar to his hands, now appear only as arrangements of light and shadow. Without the tactile feedback he once relied upon, their identities are masked. He sees edges and curves, but these are new sensations, unlinked to his previous understanding. He must learn to match the visual to the tactile. He must construct a bridge between two worlds that were once divided. This suggests that the senses are not instantly interchangeable, that knowing something by touch is not the same as knowing it by sight. Locke believed the man would not recognize the objects immediately. He believed that while the mind gathers information, it does not come pre-wired with connections across senses. Knowledge, in his view, is built through experience. If we are not born seeing, we cannot automatically link what we see to what we have only touched. This places the emphasis on learning, on the gradual layering of perception. It implies that each sense is its own universe, and that to truly know, we must travel between them slowly, patiently. But others have disagreed. Some argue that the brain is more flexible, more prepared to integrate, that even without prior visual experience, the mind might intuitively grasp that the sharp lines belong to the cube and the smooth curves to the sphere. This would suggest a kind of cross-modal mapping built into our biology, a hidden unity of the senses waiting to be awakened. The question becomes not only philosophical, but neurological. How does the brain represent the world? How are shapes, forms, and meanings stored? In modern times, science has attempted to answer Molyneux's question directly. With advancements in medicine, some individuals who were born blind have undergone surgeries to restore partial vision, and in these cases, something remarkable happens. When first exposed to visual stimuli, these individuals often do not recognize the objects they once knew by touch. The visual world is overwhelming, chaotic, bright, unfamiliar. It takes time, days, weeks, even months, for the brain to adjust. Slowly, the visual inputs are decoded, mapped, and matched to previous knowledge. It supports Locke's view that recognition across senses is not automatic, but learned. Yet over time, with experience and integration, these individuals do begin to bridge the gap. They begin to see not just light and shape, but meaning. The cube is no longer just a set of straight lines, it is the thing they once held, felt, understood. This suggests that while the senses may not begin in harmony, they can grow toward it. The brain is not a blank slate, nor is it a perfect machine. It is plastic, adaptive, capable of forming new connections when given the chance. Molyneux's question then lives in this dance between potential and experience. Beyond science, the question leads us into the depths of consciousness. What is it to know something truly? Is it the ability to label, to categorize? Or is it the felt experience, the silent, private moment when perception becomes understanding? Molyneux's question reminds us that there are layers to knowing. To see is not always to recognize. To touch is not always to comprehend. The senses give us data, but meaning is constructed in the invisible spaces between them, and sometimes what we call knowledge is nothing more than familiarity. The paradox also challenges our assumptions about reality. If one cannot immediately recognize by sight what was once known by touch, then what is the real object? Is the cube the same cube in both modalities, or is each sense creating its own version of reality? Are we ever seeing the world as it is, or only as it is filtered through our particular perceptual tools? The thought experiment quietly whispers a deeper question. Is there a world beyond perception, or is perception the world? Consider how this applies to your own life. When you hear a voice, you imagine a face. When you see a flame, you feel its warmth in memory. Your senses are not isolated. They are braided together, feeding one another constantly. And yet this integration is learned. As infants, we did not know the name of red or the feel of a mother's hand. We learned through experience, through repetition, through the gradual building of bridges between sensation and concept. Molyneux's question reminds us that every sense we take for granted was once foreign, and that even now there are ways of seeing we have not yet discovered. In philosophy, the question has inspired ongoing debate about the nature of the self. Is the self a unified experiencer, or a collection of disconnected perceptions held together by memory? If we cannot link what we see to what we feel, then what anchors the self? Are we continuous, or are we constantly becoming, reassembled moment by moment through the shifting dance of perception? Molyneux's blind man does not just confront new sights, he confronts a new version of himself, one that must learn again what the world means. And then there is the emotional texture of the question. Imagine the disorientation, the wonder, the strangeness of seeing for the first time. A flood of color, a swirl of light, all of it unfamiliar. Shapes once known in the dark are now clothed in radiance, yet foreign. There is beauty, but also confusion. Recognition does not come easily, it must be earned. In this, the question becomes not just about knowledge, but about growth. About what it means to meet the world anew, and to be humbled by it. The floating man, the prisoner in Plato's cave, the newborn mind of Descartes, all grapple with similar themes. But Molyneux's question is uniquely human. It asks not what is possible in theory, but what is felt in experience. It grounds us in the body, in the senses, in the lived truth of being aware. And it shows us that perception is not passive, it is an act. To see is to interpret, to feel is to understand, and to know is to weave those threads together, slowly, lovingly, across a lifetime. So what then is the answer to Molyneux's question? Science leans toward no. The man would not recognize the shapes by sight alone. Philosophy remains open, teasing apart the implications. But perhaps the most important truth lies not in the answer, but in the asking, in the realization that perception is not a given, but a gift. that knowing the world is a process, not a fact, that each sense offers a unique doorway, and that part of being alive is learning how to walk through them all. And perhaps that's the quiet wisdom Molyneux was pointing toward, not a puzzle to be solved, but an invitation to curiosity, to wonder how we know what we know, to marvel at the miracle of sight, of touch, of understanding, to remember that even the most familiar object, a cube, a sphere, holds mystery when seen from a different angle. The world is full of shapes we thought we recognized, and sometimes it takes a new way of seeing to truly know them. Euthyphro's Dilemma. The Athenian air was thick with the scent of olive trees and the tension of impending judgment. In the shadow of the court of Athens, a man named Euthyphro claimed to know the nature of piety. He stood confidently, having charged his own father with murder in the name of divine justice. Socrates, accused himself of corrupting the youth and impiety, approached him with curiosity. What followed was not merely a conversation between two citizens. It was a dismantling of moral assumptions that would echo across the centuries. At the heart of their dialogue lies a question so simple, yet so disturbing, that it has haunted theology and ethics ever since. Is what is morally good commanded by the gods because it is good, or is it good because the gods command it? This is Euthyphro's dilemma, a challenge to divine command theory and a cornerstone of moral philosophy. On its surface, it seems harmless, perhaps even childishly circular, but when the layers are pulled back, it reveals a fracturing of certainty. If morality depends solely on the whims of divine decree, it appears arbitrary. If it exists independently of divine will, then the gods themselves are subject to a higher moral law. Either path cracks the foundation of traditional religious ethics, and in this crack we glimpse the trembling tension between faith and reason, obedience and understanding. Consider the first horn of the dilemma, that something is good because the gods command it. On this view, morality flows directly from divine authority. Whatever the gods decree, whether mercy, war, or silence, is good simply because they said so. At first glance, this appears to support religious morality. But dig deeper, and the soil becomes unstable. If the gods had decreed cruelty or injustice to be good, would it then be so? If morality is determined by divine fiat, then anything can be justified. The sacred becomes indistinguishable from the monstrous. Morality loses its meaning, reduced to a series of commands without a deeper rationale. Now consider the second horn, that the gods command what is good because it is good. Here, goodness exists independently of divine will. The gods, like humans, recognize moral truths and align themselves with them. This preserves the integrity of morality, making it objective and rational, but in doing so, it undermines the supremacy of the divine. If the gods are not the source of morality, but merely its messengers, then they are not omnipotent arbiters of right and wrong. They become moral observers, not creators. And if morality exists outside of the gods, then we must ask, what is this mysterious source of moral truth? Where does it reside, and who or what enforces it? The dilemma does more than provoke theological discomfort. It challenges the coherence of any moral system that relies on authority. Whether divine or secular, the question remains, is morality discovered or invented? Is it a reflection of something eternal and unchanging? Or is it a construct, molded by power and circumstance? These are not questions with easy answers. They demand introspection and the courage to confront uncertainty. In this way, Euthyphro's dilemma is less a puzzle to solve than a mirror held up to our assumptions. Imagine, for a moment, that morality is entirely dependent on divine command. Picture a world where right and wrong shift with the moods of the divine, where killing might be praised one day and condemned the next. There is no appeal to fairness, no recourse to reason, only obedience. This world is terrifying because it strips morality of its guiding light. It becomes a matter of compliance, not conscience. And yet, this is the consequence of tying goodness entirely to divine will. It traps us in moral authoritarianism, where virtue is indistinguishable from submission. But swing to the other extreme, and we find another kind of abyss. If morality exists apart from the divine, we are left floating in a universe with no clear origin for our deepest values. Who decides what is good? Are moral truths eternal like mathematical facts? Or are they rooted in human intuition, shaped by evolution, culture, or emotion? If the gods merely point to what is already good, then why consult them at all? Why not go directly to the source? This view elevates reason, but risks alienating us from the spiritual roots of moral life. It offers clarity, but at the cost of transcendence. Socrates did not offer an answer to Euthyphro's dilemma. That was never his way. Instead, he left a trail of thoughtful confusion, a state he believed to be the beginning of wisdom. The point was not to destroy faith, but to deepen thought, to ask the uncomfortable questions that lie beneath our most comfortable beliefs. Euthyphro, for all his confidence, could not withstand the weight of Socratic inquiry. His definitions of piety collapsed under scrutiny, leaving only silence where certainty once stood. It is in that silence that philosophy begins. Modern thinkers have not abandoned the dilemma. It resurfaces in debates over divine command theory, secular ethics, and the nature of objective morality. Some attempt to escape it by redefining God, not as a being who issues commands, but as the very essence of goodness itself. In this view, God does not decree what is good arbitrarily, nor does he follow an external moral law. Instead, goodness is identical with God's nature. This elegant move attempts to dissolve the dilemma by collapsing its distinction, but critics argue that it merely shifts the problem. If goodness is defined by God's nature, then we must ask whether that nature is good in a meaningful sense, or simply tautologically so. Others reject the need for divine authority entirely. Humanists, moral realists, and secular ethicists seek foundations for morality in empathy, reason, and the shared conditions of human life. They argue that we do not need gods to tell us that suffering is bad or that kindness is good. These values arise from our nature as social beings, from our capacity to imagine the experiences of others. But even here, Euthyphro's shadow lingers. If morality is rooted in human nature, does it apply only to humans? What happens when empathy fails, or when reason is hijacked by ideology? Is morality still binding when it ceases to be convenient? What makes Euthyphro's dilemma so powerful is its universality. It applies not only to ancient Greek theology, but to every moral system that seeks grounding in authority. Whether the authority is a god, a tradition, a government, or a culture, the question persists. Is this right because someone powerful says so, or because it is truly independently right? This question pierces through dogma and exposes the tension between power and principle. It invites us to be more than obedient, it invites us to be thoughtful. In the quiet hours of the night, when external voices fade and only the mind remains, Euthyphro's dilemma whispers still. It asks whether we obey because we understand, or whether we understand because we are told to obey. It challenges us to consider whether morality is a compass we carry within, or a set of coordinates handed down from above. In a world that often demands certainty, this dilemma offers instead the gift of philosophical humility, a reminder that the deepest truths may lie not in answers, but in the courage to keep asking. The Ring of Gyges. Imagine a quiet shepherd tending his flock on the hills of Lydia. His life is simple, routine, and unknown to the world. One day, after a violent storm, the earth splits open before him. Curious and cautious, he climbs into the chasm and finds something that will forever alter the nature of his soul. There lies a bronze horse, hollow and ancient. Inside the horse is a corpse, a figure larger than life, wearing a simple gold ring on his finger. The shepherd takes it, unaware that this small trinket holds a power so great it threatens the foundation of morality itself. When turned a certain way, the ring renders him invisible. With this ring, the shepherd becomes Gyges, and with his new power, he commits acts he never would have dared in the light. He seduces the queen, murders the king, and seizes the throne. Thus begins the legend of the Ring of Gyges, a myth recounted by Plato, but one that echoes far beyond ancient texts. At the core of this story lies a question that cuts to the heart of human nature. If you could act without consequence, would you still be good? If no one could see you, if no one would judge you, if you could get away with anything, what choices would you make? The Ring of Gyges is not just a story about power, it is a mirror reflecting our hidden impulses. It asks whether morality is real, or merely a mask we wear to survive in society. Do we do good because we are good, or simply because we are afraid of being caught? In Plato's Republic, Glaucon tells this tale to challenge Socrates. He argues that people are only just because they fear punishment. Strip away the fear, remove the consequences, and even the most virtuous person would descend into selfishness. Gyges was not a monster. He was an ordinary man given the chance to act without being seen. And like so many would, he chose pleasure, power, and domination. The ring did not corrupt him. It revealed him. This, Glaucon insists, is the true nature of humanity. Socrates is not so quick to agree. He believes that justice is not only about how we behave in public, but about the harmony of the soul. A just person, he claims, is one whose inner world is ordered, whose reason governs appetite and spirit. To act unjustly, even if unseen, is to create disharmony within. The pleasure may be immediate, but the cost is internal chaos. Socrates offers a radical idea that injustice damages the soul regardless of external consequences, that virtue is valuable not because it is rewarded, but because it is right. But Plato does not offer easy answers. He leaves us suspended between two compelling visions of morality. On one side, a cynical realism, people are only as good as they are forced to be. On the other, a lofty idealism, true goodness exists independently of surveillance or threat. The Ring of Gyges does not tell us what to believe. It forces us to confront what we already do. In the privacy of our minds, what rules do we break? In the shadows of anonymity, who do we become? The modern world is filled with rings of Gyges. The internet, with its cloak of usernames and encryption, allows people to speak and act without being seen. Social media offers the illusion of presence while hiding true identity. The digital world reveals what people do when they feel unaccountable. Trolling, deception, exploitation, they thrive where the gaze of justice is blurred. But it is not just the wicked who stumble in the dark. Even the well-meaning can slip when the lights are off. The question becomes, how do we behave when no one is watching? There is a difference between reputation and character. Reputation is what others see. Character is what we do in solitude. The ring of Gyges tempts us to sacrifice character for gain. But over time, the soul pays a price. Lying, stealing, betraying, they leave marks, not always visible to the world, but etched into the psyche. Guilt, shame, anxiety, these are not punishments from the outside, but signals from within. Even without external judgment, there is a part of us that knows, that watches, that remembers. Imagine, for a moment, a society where everyone had such a ring. A world where invisibility was common and anyone could act without detection. Would there be order? Could love survive? Would justice mean anything at all? This is not mere fantasy. In many ways, technology is inching us closer to this reality. Surveillance cameras can be evaded. AI can impersonate identities. Deepfakes can create illusion. As anonymity increases, so too does the importance of internal morality. Without a shared commitment to truth and justice, society unravels, not from an external attack, but from internal decay. And yet, the myth also invites compassion. It reminds us that every person holds the capacity for both good and evil, that morality is not a fixed trait, but a daily choice. Perhaps Gyges was not evil by nature, but overwhelmed by opportunity. Perhaps the ring offered a freedom he was never prepared to bear. It is easy to judge from a distance, but who among us, given absolute power and zero accountability, could resist every temptation? The story humbles us. It asks us to consider not only what we would do, but who we are trying to become. Some philosophers argue that the ring simply reveals the truth, that morality without consequences is a fantasy, and only the fear of punishment keeps us aligned. But others believe that virtue can be cultivated like a muscle, that through reflection, education, and empathy, we can grow into people who do right, even when no one is looking. The ring of Gyges, then, becomes a test, not of what we are, but of what we are capable of being. It asks, can we build a self that does not require a watcher? There are moments in life when we each wear the ring, when we are alone, when choices are private, when consequences seem far away. In those moments, the soul speaks. It tells us whether we are living by fear or by principle, whether our morality is borrowed or owned. The ring of Gyges is not just about power, it is about integrity. The quiet, unseen, unwavering integrity that holds us together when the world isn't watching. And in the end, perhaps the most haunting truth is this: the ring was never needed to become invisible. People hide behind masks of normalcy every day. Behind polite smiles and practiced words, whole worlds remain unseen. The real invisibility is not in the body, but in the soul. The ring of Gyges is not a myth about magic, it is a myth about mirrors. And what it reflects back to us is not fantasy, but the truth we fear to see, not of others, but of ourselves. Would you still be just if justice had no reward? Zhuangzi's Butterfly Dream. There is a dream. In it, a man named Zhang Zhu becomes a butterfly. He flutters through the air with ease, dancing on the wind, landing softly on flowers, and knowing nothing of the world of men. There are no taxes, no plans, no sorrows. He is only a butterfly, effortlessly alive. Then he wakes. And he is Zhang Zhu again, the philosopher. But something lingers, a soft confusion. Was he Zhang Zhu who dreamt he was a butterfly? Or is he now a butterfly dreaming he is Zhang Zhu? In this simple, poetic parable, Zhuangzi plants a seed that grows into one of the most profound questions of all time. What is the boundary between waking and dreaming, between illusion and reality, between self and the world? Zhuangzi's butterfly dream is not a riddle to be solved, but a lens to shift perception. It does not ask for answers, but invites disorientation. It opens the mind like a window to the breeze, allowing uncertainty to enter with grace rather than fear. At first glance, it seems like a quaint anecdote, but beneath it lies a quiet storm, a philosophical upheaval that calls into question the very ground beneath our feet. If we cannot know with certainty that we are awake, how can we claim to know anything else at all? Western philosophy has long grappled with similar questions. Descartes famously doubted everything, even his own body, until he reached the one thing he could not doubt, that he was doubting. I think, therefore I am. But Zhuangzi takes a different path. He does not grasp for certainty, but releases it. He does not anchor himself in rationality, but drifts with the mystery. The butterfly dream is not about finding truth, but about letting go of the illusion that we ever possessed it. In doing so, it offers a strange kind of freedom, a liberation from the tyranny of what we think we know. We live in a world of assumptions. We assume the sun will rise, we assume our memories are accurate, we assume we are the same person we were yesterday. But what if these assumptions are just scaffolding built on dreams? What if, like the butterfly, we are merely floating through a temporary experience, one that vanishes the moment we believe it to be real? The butterfly dream asks, not for paranoia, but for wonder. It suggests that certainty is not strength, but a kind of sleep, and awakening, paradoxically, may come through the acceptance of doubt. In Taoist thought, the self is not a fixed entity, but a flowing process, always changing, always becoming. Zhuangzi's dream reflects this idea perfectly. Who we are is not a solid, unchanging thing. It is more like mist, visible for a time, then gone. If identity is fluid, then the boundary between dream and waking becomes porous. There is no need to draw a hard line. The dream is part of reality, and reality is laced with dreams. In this view, the butterfly and Zhuangzi are not opposites, but reflections of the same mysterious unfolding. Think about your own dreams, how real they feel in the moment, how they convince you of their logic, their urgency, their truth. And then think of waking life, how it too demands belief. We rush to work, we fear the future, we cling to plans, as if everything depended on it. But if life itself is a kind of dream, what happens to all that fear, all that urgency? Zhuangzi's insight is both gentle and radical. He suggests we take life seriously, but not too seriously. That we walk the world lightly, like a butterfly on the breeze, aware that even our most solemn convictions might one day dissolve into mist. There is peace in this view, a kind of sacred detachment, not coldness but spaciousness. If we are not bound by rigid identities, if ourselves are not prisons but poems, then we are free to become, free to move, to shift, to awaken again and again. The butterfly dream whispers, do not cling to names, to roles, to ideas of who you are. Let them come, let them go. Let them change. Just as the butterfly cannot hold the air, we too must let experience pass through us without gripping it too tightly. This story also holds a mirror to the concept of duality, the illusion of separation. We draw lines, dream and reality, self and other, life and death. But Zhuangzi suggests these are not fixed divides, but flowing continuities. Just as night fades into morning without a sharp break, so too do our experiences blend and blur. To insist on absolute categories is to miss the softness of the world. The butterfly dream invites us to live in the blur, to find beauty in ambiguity, and to trust that the truth may not come as a definition, but as a feeling, a movement, a dance. There's something deeply modern in Zhuangzu's ancient parable. Today, we navigate layers of reality more than ever. Virtual realities, online identities, digital dreams, we slip between them with ease. Are we still ourselves in these spaces, or are we something new? Zhuangzu reminds us that we've always been shifting. The technology may be new, but the question is ancient. Who are you really? The person in the mirror, the avatar on the screen, the dreamer in the night, perhaps all of them, perhaps none. And then there's the subtle joy in it all. The dream is not a trap, but a playground. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The butterfly dream does not scold us for being unsure. It celebrates the uncertainty. It tells us that in not knowing, we are more alive. That when we let go of the need to be right, we begin to see clearly. The butterfly does not need to prove anything. It just flies. And maybe that's the lesson Zhuangzu leaves us with, not to seek control, but to allow the dance, to live gently, and to flutter freely in the winds of experience. So, when you next wake from a dream or drift into one, ask yourself not what is real, but what is present. Ask not who you are in some absolute sense, but who you are becoming in this moment. Let the boundary between self and world soften. Let the edges of reality blur. The butterfly dream is not a warning. It is a gift. A reminder that even as we move through life with plans and roles and names, we are always more than we appear, or perhaps less. Just breath. Just presence. Just the shimmering wings of a butterfly, dancing somewhere between the dream and the dreamer. The Sorite's heap paradox. There is a single grain of sand, small, insignificant, resting quietly on the ground. You add another grain, and then another. At first, nothing changes. It's still just a few grains. But you continue, slowly, patiently, one grain at a time. Eventually, a pile begins to form, and at some point, though you cannot say exactly when, you find yourself looking not at a few grains, but at a heap, a collection, a mass, something more than the sum of its parts. Now, reverse the process. Take away one grain, it still looks like a heap. Take away another, still a heap, and another. When exactly does it stop being one? At what point does the heap cease to be a heap and return to being just a few grains? This is the Sorite's paradox, a gentle yet maddening riddle that quietly unravels our understanding of vague concepts. The paradox derives its name from the Greek word sorites, meaning heap. It's simple in construction but deep in consequence. It plays with the edges of logic and language, revealing the strange space where precision slips and ambiguity rules. It reminds us that many of the categories we live by, rich and poor, tall and short, old and young, healthy and sick, are not as clear-cut as we pretend. They dissolve under scrutiny, their boundaries fading like the line where the sea meets the sky. The Sorite's paradox doesn't just expose a logical puzzle. It holds up a mirror to the way we carve the world into parts and challenges whether those parts truly exist. At the heart of the paradox is the idea of vagueness. Some concepts in our language are crisp and exact. Even number, for example, has a clear definition. Triangle, planet, hydrogen. These terms have fixed meanings. But others are blurry by nature. Bald, tall, wealthy. These words do not correspond to precise quantities. They depend on context, perception, and convention. We use them every day as if they were solid, but when pressed, they dissolve like mist in the morning sun. The Sorites paradox lives in this space of fuzziness. It doesn't break logic, it gently teases it apart, thread by thread. Philosophers have long tried to resolve the paradox. One response is to deny that the initial premise holds. Maybe, they argue, there is a precise point where a heap becomes a heap, even if we don't know it. This view, known as epistemicism, suggests that vagueness is just a symptom of our ignorance. There is a grain, the 10,000th perhaps, where the magic happens. Before that, no heap. After that, heap. It's a clean solution, but it feels unsatisfying. It turns something poetic and human into a cold math problem. And it clashes with our experience, which tells us that concepts like heap are flexible, fluid, and deeply dependent on how we see the world. Another approach is to reject the idea that logic must always be binary. This leads to fuzzy logic, a system in which truth comes in degrees. Instead of saying something is either true or false, we assign it a value between 0 and 1. In this framework, a collection of 5 grains might be 0.1 heap, while 5,000 grains might be 0.99. There is no sharp boundary, only gradual change. This mirrors how we often think and speak in daily life. A person may be somewhat tall or kind of rich. Fuzzy logic allows for the gray areas, the in-betweens, the spaces where most of human experience actually lives. But it also complicates our desire for clarity. We crave certainty, even when the world resists it. There's a subtle beauty in how the Sorites paradox touches so many corners of life. Consider identity. At what point do you become a different person? Day by day, your cells change, your memories shift, your beliefs evolve, yet you continue to call yourself you. When does the continuity break? If a single hair does not make one less bald and a single memory does not erase a person's self, then how do we define change at all? The paradox gently asks us whether we are ever truly the same person, or whether we too are just a heap of moments, cells, thoughts, and breath, forever shifting under the illusion of consistency. Or consider time. At what moment does night become day? Is it when the sun breaks the horizon, or when the sky begins to pale? Is it the hour marked on a clock, or the instant your eyes perceive the light? Time, too, is a Sorites heap. Seconds accumulate into minutes, minutes into hours, and before you know it, a day is gone. But the transition is never sharp. It slides, slow and silent, like shadow into dusk. And so the paradox returns. When exactly did today become tomorrow? Language, the very tool we use to think and communicate, is built on these unstable foundations. We create categories not because they are perfect, but because they are useful. Child and adult, alive and dead, safe and dangerous. These labels help us navigate the world. But the Sorites paradox whispers that beneath every category is a continuum. A river where we thought there was a line. It doesn't mean categories are wrong, only that they are approximations, maps, not the territory. And maps, while helpful, always leave something out. There's also something deeply psychological about the paradox. It reflects the way change often escapes our notice. People don't fall in love all at once. They don't lose hope in a single day. Habits are built, grain by grain, thought by thought, until one day we wake up in a new reality and wonder how we got there. The Sorites paradox reveals the quiet power of accumulation. The way small acts, repeated, can shape a life. It reminds us that change doesn't always come with a trumpet blast. Sometimes it tiptoes in, one grain at a time. And yet the paradox also carries a warning, because if no single grain makes a heap, we might dismiss the value of each one. If no single act makes a difference, we may stop trying. This is the trap of gradualism, the illusion that nothing matters because no one thing matters. But the truth is more complex. While no single grain is the heap exists only because of the grains. Each one contributes, each one builds. This insight gives quiet power to small acts of kindness, small steps of growth, small moments of courage. They may seem insignificant on their own, but together they become something real. So the Sorites paradox is not just a game of logic. It is a meditation on the nature of change, the limits of language, and the mystery of identity. It shows us that the world resists neat boundaries, and that our need for precision often clashes with the fluidity of life. But instead of resisting this, we can embrace it. We can learn to live in the spaces between yes and no, between here and there. We can find peace in the paradox, not by solving it, but by letting it soften our grip on certainty. The next time you see a pile of autumn leaves, or a sand dune rising in the distance, or a crowd gathering in a square, pause and ask yourself, when did it become a heap? The answer will not come in numbers or logic. It will come as a feeling, a sense, a quiet knowing that something has changed, even if you cannot say exactly when. That is the gift of the Sorites paradox. Not to confuse, but to awaken, to draw your attention to the thresholds of experience, to remind you that life, in all its complexity, is built not in leaps, but in layers. Zeno's Achilles paradox. In the stillness of ancient Greece, a philosopher named Zeno of Elea sat and posed a question that would haunt thinkers for millennia. Picture Achilles, the swiftest of all mortals, his feet barely touching the ground as he races forward. Ahead of him stands a slow-moving tortoise, plodding steadily along. To make the race fair, the tortoise is given a head start. Now, logic takes the reins. Zeno asks, by the time Achilles reaches the point where the tortoise began, the tortoise will have moved a little farther ahead. And when Achilles reaches that new point, the tortoise will have moved forward again. No matter how fast Achilles runs, he must always catch up to where the tortoise has been, never quite overtaking him. And so, paradoxically, the slower tortoise can never be caught by the faster Achilles. A simple story, but within it lies one of the most profound challenges to our understanding of motion, time, and continuity. At first glance, the paradox seems absurd. Of course Achilles would overtake the tortoise. He is a hero after all, faster by far. The tortoise is slow, steady, and no match for his speed. We've all seen races like this play out in real life, where the quicker runner passes the slower one with ease. But Zeno was not interested in the physical world as much as the logical one. His paradox is not a denial of motion, but a challenge to the coherence of how we describe it. He wanted to show that our ideas of space and time lead to contradiction when pushed to their logical extremes, and in doing so, he opened a doorway into the infinite. The paradox works by dividing the race into an endless sequence of points. Achilles must first reach the spot where the tortoise started. Then he must reach the spot where the tortoise moved to while Achilles was on his way. And again, and again. Each time the distance between them grows smaller, but never quite disappears. It's an infinite process, an infinite number of steps that Achilles must complete to overtake the tortoise. How can he complete an infinite number of tasks in a finite time? That's the heart of the riddle. Zeno suggests that he cannot. That motion, when examined closely, breaks apart into impossibility. What makes this paradox so disturbing is not that it denies what we see, but that it uses logic to suggest that what we see cannot be true. It challenges our trust in experience. It whispers that beneath the surface of reality lies something broken or contradictory, and this whisper grows louder the more we try to explain it. Because while the race seems simple, the underlying math becomes slippery. Infinity is a concept we often invoke, but rarely understand. It stretches the limits of our reasoning, turning the obvious into the impossible. To resolve the paradox, later thinkers introduced new ideas about numbers and limits. They explained that while the number of steps Achilles must run is infinite, the total time it takes to run them can still be finite. This is the beauty of a converging series. If each step takes half the time of the one before it, the sum of all those steps approaches a limit. Achilles may pass through an infinite sequence, but he does so in a finite time. In modern mathematics, this explanation is sound. The paradox dissolves under the light of calculus. But even so, the feeling it leaves behind, the sense of a crack in the fabric of motion, remains. Because the real power of Zeno's paradox lies not in its conclusion, but in its method. It teaches us how easily logic can lead us astray, how language and reasoning, when stretched too tightly, can snap. It reveals that our most basic concepts, distance, time, speed, are not as stable as we think, and that our understanding of the world is built not on certainty, but on useful approximations. Achilles does overtake the tortoise, but in explaining how, we discover just how strange motion really is. The paradox also offers a lesson in perspective. From one view, Achilles is always behind. From another, he passes the tortoise with ease. The contradiction lies not in the motion, but in the description. This is a profound insight. So much of life is like this, a matter of framing. A challenge that seems unsolvable when broken into pieces may flow naturally when seen as a whole. Zeno forces us to confront the limits of analysis. Sometimes, in seeking to understand a process by dividing it endlessly, we lose sight of the motion itself. We forget that to live is to move forward, not to freeze time into frames. There is also something metaphysical at play here. Zeno's paradox isn't just about running or racing, it's about the nature of reality itself. Is the world continuous or discrete? Is time a flowing river or a sequence of moments? If we keep dividing things, space, time, matter, do we reach a smallest part, or do we fall forever into smaller and smaller pieces? These questions haunt not just philosophers, but physicists. Quantum mechanics, with its discrete particles and probabilistic events, seems to favor one view. Relativity, with its smooth space-time, favors another. Zeno's paradox sits in the middle, asking quietly, what is motion, really? In a deeper sense, the paradox is about the struggle between the finite and the infinite, between what we can count and what we can never finish. We live in a world of limits, limited time, limited steps, limited understanding. But we dream of the infinite. And sometimes, like Zeno, we try to bring infinity into the world of logic and reason. When we do, we often find ourselves lost in contradiction. Achilles and the tortoise remind us that infinity is not a destination, but a direction, a way of thinking that must be handled with care. And yet, there's something strangely beautiful in the image, the swift hero and the slow creature. locked in a race where the finish line is always just out of reach. It's a metaphor for so much in life, for ambition, for progress, for the pursuit of understanding. We chase goals, thinking we are close, only to find the finish line has moved again. We strive, we reach, and sometimes it feels like we're always behind. But like Achilles, we keep running. Because motion is not just about distance. It's about intention, about persistence, about the rhythm of breath and step and will. Zeno's paradox doesn't deny the race, it deepens it. It reminds us that even the most obvious truths deserve a second look, that behind the ordinary lies the extraordinary, that within the smallest distance, an infinite journey might unfold. And perhaps, most importantly, it humbles us. It shows that reason, for all its brilliance, has its limits, that sometimes truth is not in the conclusion, but in the question, in the moment of pause, in the space between one grain of thought and the next. So let us walk with Zeno and Achilles, not to solve the paradox, but to sit with it, to feel its weight and wonder, to watch as logic loops and twists and then slowly returns to stillness. The tortoise ever steady, Achilles ever swift, and in between them a puzzle that lives not just in books, but in every moment we try to measure, every step we try to count. The race continues, and perhaps it always will. Buridan's ass. In a quiet field, under a soft blue sky, stands a donkey. He is hungry and he is thirsty. To his left is a bale of hay, to his right a pail of water. Both are equally near, both are equally appealing. The donkey, rational and deliberate, turns his attention left, then right, then back again, but no matter how long he considers, he cannot find a reason to choose one over the other. The options are perfectly balanced, and so he stands there, motionless, trapped in perfect indecision. Time passes, the sun shifts, and in this frozen moment of logic without action, the donkey starves. This is Buridan's ass, a thought experiment that asks, what happens when reason itself becomes a prison? Named after the 14th century French philosopher Jean Buridan, this paradox is not about animals, but about humans and the hidden traps of rationality. It takes aim at a specific idea that a rational agent will always act in accordance with the best reason. But what if two options are truly equal? What if the scales are so perfectly balanced that no reason tips them? In such cases, pure reason may fail to guide us, and without some other principle, instinct, emotion, randomness, we may be left suspended in an endless loop of deliberation. The paradox is quiet, almost comical, but its implications reach deep into ethics, psychology, and even artificial intelligence. We often assume that rationality is the key to good decision-making, that thinking things through, weighing the pros and cons, leads us to clarity. But Buridan's ass reveals a flaw in this assumption. Rationality can guide us when choices are unequal, when one is better or worse, but when all factors are balanced, it gives no guidance at all. It freezes, and in that stillness, the line between wisdom and paralysis begins to blur. The donkey does not choose badly, he simply does not choose at all, and this, too, is a kind of failure. Now consider how this plays out in human life. We face decisions every day that seem trivial, yet oddly paralyzing. Which movie to watch? Which shirt to wear? Which road to take home? When the stakes are low and the choice is equal, indecision can creep in like fog. But the real trouble comes with larger questions. Which job to take? Which city to live in? whether to stay or to leave. When both paths offer different kinds of fulfillment and different kinds of uncertainty, reason alone may falter. We circle the options, hoping for a sign, a tipping point. But sometimes, there is none. What Buridan's ass suggests is that some part of us must act without certainty, that at times, the leap comes before the reason. This idea can feel uncomfortable. We like to believe our choices are always grounded, justified, but in truth, many of our most important decisions are made in the shadow of doubt. Love, career, identity, these are not questions with perfect answers. And yet we must choose. To live is to move forward even when the path is unclear. In this way, the paradox becomes not just a philosophical puzzle, but a metaphor for courage. There is also a deep psychological layer to the paradox. Indecision is not always about logic. It can be a mask for fear, fear of loss, fear of regret, fear of missing the better path. We hesitate not because we lack options, but because we fear the consequences of being wrong. The donkey stands still because he cannot bear to turn away from either option, but in doing so, he loses both. This is the cruel irony of indecision. In trying to avoid risk, we may invite the very outcome we fear. The longer we wait, the more life passes us by. Modern thinkers have tried to answer Buridan's challenge. Some suggest that real agents never face truly equal options. There's always some slight preference, however small, a glimmer of desire, a flicker of intuition that breaks the tie. Others argue that when reason fails, randomness can step in, a coin flip, a sudden impulse, a moment of whimsy. These are not irrational, they are the tools we use when reason reaches its limit. Even in science, randomness plays a role. At the quantum level, particles do not behave deterministically. Uncertainty is not just tolerated, it's built into the fabric of reality. And what about artificial intelligence? If we build a perfectly rational machine, how will it handle Buridan's ass? Will it freeze when faced with perfect symmetry? Or will we design it to inject randomness, to mimic instinct, to simulate a choice where none is given? This question is not just theoretical. As AI takes on more roles in decision-making, the paradox becomes a real design problem. We are learning that intelligence is not just about logic, it's about movement, even in the absence of clarity. Perhaps to be truly intelligent is not to always choose the best option, but to choose at all. The paradox also holds spiritual resonance. In many traditions, the soul is seen as navigating between competing desires, between the material and the spiritual, the known and the unknown. At times, these forces may seem equal, the path of comfort and the path of growth, the familiar and the transformative. In these moments, reason may whisper both ways, but something deeper must decide. A trust in intuition, a faith in the unfolding, a surrender to movement. Buridan's ass reminds us that the soul, like the donkey, must eventually take a step, even when the destination is unclear. And yet there is tenderness in this struggle. The donkey is not foolish. He is thoughtful, deliberate. His paralysis is not laziness, but an excess of care. He does not rush blindly. He considers. He weighs. And in this there is something deeply human. We too hesitate because we want to choose well. We want to honor our lives with thoughtful choices. The danger lies not in caution, but in forgetting that even imperfect choices carry us forward, that to move, to act, to risk, is to be alive. Perhaps Buridan's ass is not meant to be solved, but simply understood. It shows us the limits of logic and the necessity of stepping beyond it. It teaches us that movement itself can be a form of wisdom, that sometimes the answer is not to think more, but to trust more, to trust that whichever path we choose, we will meet ourselves along the way, that even if we choose wrong, we will grow, we will learn, and in that learning, we become more than the sum of our choices. So the next time you find yourself stuck between two decisions, two desires, two versions of your future, think of the donkey. Not with pity, but with compassion. See in him your own longing for clarity, your own fear of choosing wrong. Then remember, motion is not the enemy of wisdom. Stillness can protect, but it can also imprison. You do not need perfect certainty to move. You only need the courage to take one small step toward the hay, toward the water, toward whatever calls to you, however softly. Avicenna's Floating Man. Close your eyes and imagine yourself suspended in nothingness. There is no earth beneath you, no air to move through, no sound to touch your ears. You are floating, not in water, not in space, but in pure absence. You have no memories, no sensory experiences. Your eyes are closed, your limbs are not touching. You do not even know your body exists. There is no smell, no heat, no pressure. And yet, you are aware. There is a faint and undeniable sense that you exist, even if you do not know how, or why, or what it means to be. This is Avicenna's Floating Man, a philosophical thought experiment from the 11th century, crafted to explore the mystery of self-awareness and the nature of the soul. Avicenna, also known as Ibn Sina, was a Persian polymath whose writings would influence centuries of thought across the Islamic world and medieval Europe. He proposed the floating man as a way to explore what consciousness is when stripped of all experience. He asks us to imagine a person who has been created fully formed, but suspended in a void where no sensory data can reach them. This person cannot see, hear, touch, taste, or smell. They have no body to feel. And yet, Avicenna insists, they would still possess an awareness of their own existence. I am, the floating man would say, without language, without concept, but with certainty. This idea is radical. It suggests that the self is not dependent on the body, nor on the world, but exists in its own right. It is not a product of sensation or social identity. It is something deeper, more essential. For Avicenna, this experiment was meant to show that the soul, what we might now call consciousness, is distinct from the body. Not in a mystical or magical sense, but in a philosophical one. He was not denying the body's importance, but pointing to a core of awareness that remains when everything else is taken away. The floating man is still. He does not move, for he does not know he has limbs to move. He does not feel the pull of gravity or the warmth of the sun. Yet there is something undeniable flickering within him. Not a thought, not an image, but a presence. This is not memory, for he has none. It is not imagination, for there is nothing to imagine. It is pure self-awareness, a silent I am that arises without any external cue. And in this awareness lies one of the deepest philosophical questions. Is the self something we are, or something we experience? Western philosophy would later echo Avicenna's insight. Descartes, centuries after, would declare, I think, therefore I am. But Avicenna's floating man goes further. He does not need to think to exist. He only needs to be aware. Even without thought, even without language, there is a center of being. This distinction between thought and consciousness, between mind and soul, opens vast territory. It suggests that awareness is not something we construct. It is something we discover, already there, waiting like a hidden chamber at the heart of our experience. In modern terms, the floating man feels like a precursor to consciousness studies, to the debates about mind and matter, subjectivity and neuroscience. But what makes the thought experiment so haunting is its simplicity. It does not rely on complex arguments or data. It asks only that we imagine ourselves without everything we normally associate with identity, without a past, without a body, without a world. And then it asks, would you still know that you are? Most of us live in the opposite direction. We define ourselves by the things around us, our names, our relationships, our jobs, our sensations. We believe we are the sum of our experiences. But the floating man suggests a different view, that there is something beneath all of that. A self that is not built from the outside in, but that exists before and beyond anything it touches. This self is not loud. It does not speak in thoughts or opinions. It is silent, still, and enduring. Meditation traditions around the world echo this idea. In Zen, the practice of sitting still and watching the breath leads one not toward new information, but toward the direct experience of being. In Vedanta, the self is seen as pure awareness, unchanging, beyond mind and matter. In Sufism, the journey inward is a return to the divine spark within. Across these traditions, the same insight emerges. Beneath the noise of life, there is something constant, something that simply is. But the floating man is not just a metaphysical musing. It is a challenge to how we understand consciousness in the modern age. If awareness can exist without sensation, what does that mean for the brain, for the body, for artificial intelligence? Could we ever build a machine that truly knows it exists? Or is there something about this flickering awareness, this silent I, that cannot be reduced to circuits or code? Avicenna does not offer an answer. He only invites us into the question. There is also an ethical dimension to the floating man. If we possess a soul, or a center of consciousness that is distinct from our physical form, then how we treat others takes on new weight, not because of their roles or achievements, but because of this shared interior light. Beneath all appearances, there is this quiet I am in each of us. To see another in this way is to move beyond labels, beyond difference. It is to meet not the mask, but the presence behind the mask. And then there's the emotional resonance. Who has not, at some moment in life, felt suspended, lost between worlds, disconnected from the senses, from certainty, from place or purpose? In these moments, we may feel like the floating man, adrift, unseen, untouched. But Avicenna offers a strange kind of comfort. Even in that suspension, something remains. Awareness does not vanish. It watches, it witnesses, and in that witnessing, there is stillness. Perhaps even peace. In the end, the floating man is not meant to prove anything. He is not an argument, but an invitation to close our eyes, to step away from the noise, to ask, beneath all the layers, what remains, what is always here no matter what comes or goes. The answer may not come in words, it may come in silence, in breath, in the soft recognition that even without a story, we still are. So the next time you find yourself in a moment of quiet, before sleep, in the stillness of meditation, or simply gazing out the window, imagine the floating man, not as a distant figure, but as a part of yourself, the part that does not need to perform, or remember, or know, the part that simply is. Let that awareness settle like mist. Let it remind you that even in the absence of everything, your being shines through, not because of what you do or think, but simply because you are. Wittgenstein's beetle in a box. Imagine a room full of people. Each one holds a small box. No one can look inside another person's box. Everyone can only open their own. Inside each box, they are told, is something called a beetle. They've always used this word, beetle, to refer to whatever is in their box. And since they've grown up hearing it, they've all come to assume they're talking about the same thing. But what if the contents of the boxes were different? What if some were empty? What if, in truth, no two people had the same thing inside at all? And yet the word continues to work. Everyone keeps saying beetle as though they agree. This is Ludwig Wittgenstein's famous thought experiment, his beetle in a box. And within it lies a profound exploration of language, meaning, and the deep isolation of private experience. The image is simple, but its implications are vast. Wittgenstein introduces the beetle not to make us doubt the reality of experience, but to draw attention to how language functions. He's not asking what the beetle is, but how the word beetle is used. He suggests that when it comes to our inner states, pain, joy, sorrow, love, we are all holding a box. And while we use words to describe what we feel inside, no one else can ever look directly into our box. The word pain, for example, might refer to something very specific for you, sharp, sudden, a jolt in the nerve. For someone else, it might be dull, constant, invisible. And yet we both use the word, believing we understand each other. This is the beauty and the mystery of language. It allows us to speak of things we cannot share directly. I can never feel your pain, you can never feel mine, but we both say it hurts, and something passes between us, imperfect, incomplete, but meaningful. Wittgenstein's point is not that words are useless, but that they work not because we all have identical inner experiences, but because we've learned how to use them in the same way. Language is not a window into the soul. It is a tool we use to navigate the shared world, even as our inner worlds remain forever our own. There is a deep humility in this view. We often act as though words unlock truth, as though we can reach into each other's minds with perfect clarity. But the beetle reminds us that every word carries ambiguity, that every meaning is shaped by context, by history, by use. The box might be empty, the beetle might be different for everyone, and yet we keep speaking, we keep reaching out, we keep trying to bridge the space between self and other with sounds and signs and sentences. Wittgenstein was challenging the idea that words derive their meaning from pointing to private experiences. If each person's beetle is hidden, then it cannot be the foundation of the word's meaning. Instead, meaning comes from use, how we deploy words in practice, how they function in our lives. This marks a shift from the inner to the outer, from what's in the box to how we carry it. The beetle becomes a placeholder, a symbol not of certainty, but of convention. And in that shift, we begin to see that language is not a mirror of thought, it is a form of life. The beetle in a box is especially powerful when we think about emotions. When I say, "I'm sad," what am I really telling you? You cannot feel what I feel. You do not see my sadness the way I see it. And yet you nod. You understand. Maybe you've been there, maybe you haven't. But the word connects us, not through shared sensation, but through shared behavior, through stories, gestures, patterns. Language becomes less about transmission and more about participation, less about defining and more about doing. In this way, Wittgenstein moves philosophy away from metaphysical puzzles and toward the texture of everyday life. He doesn't want us to ask what a beetle really is. He wants us to notice how we use the word. He invites us to listen to language not as a code, but as a rhythm that guides our actions, shapes our expectations, and binds us together, even when our inner lives remain hidden. He teaches us to look not inside the box, but around it. The paradox of the beetle also raises questions about privacy and solitude. If no one can see inside your box, are you alone in your experience? Perhaps, but perhaps not. Perhaps what connects us is not the sameness of our beetles, but the way we live with them. We may never fully understand each other's pain or joy or longing, but we can learn to walk alongside those feelings, to speak gently, to listen close, to respect the mystery within each box. And then there's the quiet poetry of it all. The image of a person holding a box, guarding something unseen, yet still speaking of it, still naming it, captures something deeply human. We are creatures of silence and sound. We carry things we cannot explain. We feel things we cannot show, and yet we keep trying. We keep using language even when it fails, even when it falls short. Because something in us wants to be known, wants to be reached, wants to believe that even if the beetle is private, the act of naming it is not. In many ways, the beetle represents more than just private sensations. It stands for the whole realm of inner life, thoughts, dreams, memories, identity, all the things we cannot lay out on the table, but which still shape who we are. The question is not whether these things are real, but how we live with them. How we share them without showing them. How we trust that when someone says, "I understand," they mean it, even if their understanding looks nothing like ours. Modern psychology and neuroscience have since explored these ideas from other angles. They study how perception varies, how language develops, how empathy works, and yet, Wittgenstein's insight remains as relevant as ever. Science may map the brain, trace the pathways of pain, but it still cannot peer into the box. It cannot replace the first-person perspective. It cannot fully capture what it means to feel, to hope, to mourn. The beetle remains, silent, private, unknown. There is also a lesson in humility here. In a world obsessed with clarity, with certainty, Wittgenstein reminds us that some things resist definition, that not everything can be shared, and not everything needs to be. The beetle does not need to be seen to matter. The value lies in the use of the word, in the connection it enables. We speak not to expose ourselves, but to reach out, to build bridges across the unknowable, to make peace with the fact that every person we meet is holding a box we'll never open. So what do we do with this paradox? We accept it. We live with it. We let it soften us. The next time someone tells you they are in pain, remember the beetle. Don't assume you know exactly what they mean. Don't reduce their words to your own understanding. Listen instead to how they speak. Watch how they move. Feel the weight of the box they carry. And know that your box, too, is unseen. That your beetle, too, is a mystery. And that somehow, in the shared space between language and silence, we meet the utility monster. In the quiet heart of moral philosophy, there exists a creature not of flesh, but of thought. It does not breathe, eat, or sleep, yet its presence has unsettled generations of ethical theorists. This being is called the utility monster, and it lives not in the pages of science fiction, but in the soft margins of a philosophical argument. First proposed by the philosopher Robert Nozick, the utility monster was created to challenge the foundations of utilitarianism, the idea that we should always act to produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number. But what if one being, one extraordinary creature, could feel more happiness than all the rest? What if its capacity for pleasure dwarfed that of everyone else combined? Should we feed all our resources to the monster, even if everyone else suffers? And if not, what does that say about our cherished ideals of maximizing good? The utility monster is not just a puzzle, it is a mirror, a reflection of the hidden assumptions we carry about value, fairness, and what it means to do good. Utilitarianism, at its core, is simple and appealing. Measure happiness, compare outcomes, choose the action that produces the most well-being. It treats happiness as a quantity, something that can be added, subtracted, balanced like a spreadsheet. But Nozick's monster distorts this simplicity. It reveals that maximizing happiness might come at a terrible cost. Because if one being can feel 10 times more joy from a single cookie than you or I could ever feel, then utilitarian logic says it should get all the cookies, all the food, all the shelter, all the art and love and light. The rest of us, in comparison, are irrelevant. At first, the monster seems absurd, but the thought experiment strikes a deep and uncomfortable chord. What if we are already living in a world where some people matter more, not because of their inherent worth, but because they extract more utility from life? What if policies that claim to help the most are silently privileging those whose pleasures register more loudly? In modern terms, the utility monster might not be a beast, but a billionaire, someone whose happiness depends on luxury yachts, private islands, space travel. Should we feed them endlessly if their joy is statistically greater than ours? Nozick's critique is not a rejection of happiness. It is a challenge to the idea that happiness is all that matters. The monster helps us see the moral blind spot in pure utilitarian thinking. If we follow it strictly, we risk sacrificing the many for the one. We lose the sense of equality, of shared humanity. The monster reminds us that morality must be about more than maximizing numbers. It must be about fairness, about respect, about the value of individuals, regardless of their utility output. Otherwise, we become calculators. The paradox also forces us to think about the very nature of pleasure. Is happiness something that can be scaled infinitely? Can one being feel 1,000,000 times more joy than another? Or are we, as humans, bound by similar emotional ceilings? If so, the monster cannot exist. But if not, if some minds are more sensitive, more alive to pleasure, then the dilemma returns. Do we owe more to those who feel more, or do we protect the dignity of all, even at the cost of some utility? This question touches on how we measure well-being in the real world. Governments, organizations, even families must make decisions about who gets what, who receives help, who is prioritized. Utilitarian logic can be useful, even necessary, but the monster warns us to be careful, that maximizing total happiness is not always the same as doing the right thing. It whispers that justice is not just about outcomes, it is about limits, about boundaries we do not cross, even for the sake of the greater good. There's also something deeply emotional about the monster. It represents the fear that we are not enough, that our quiet pleasures, reading a book, sharing a meal, watching the sunset, do not count as much as someone else's grand ecstasy, that our voices are too soft, our joys too small. The monster looms as a figure of greed, yes, but also of envy, of comparison, of the dark impulse to rank worth by feeling. But in truth, our happiness need not be measured to matter. It simply matters because it is ours. Nozick's thought experiment does not offer a solution, it offers a question, and like all good paradoxes, it refuses to go away. It lingers. It challenges us to look more closely at our principles, to ask whether the goal of morality is really to maximize or whether it is to balance, to protect, to care. The monster cannot be killed by logic. It can only be answered by reflection, by asking what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of beings we want to be. Perhaps the real danger is not the monster itself, but what it reveals about us, that we might be tempted to feed it, that we might lose sight of the many in favor of the loudest, the most demanding, the most powerful. The monster is a warning, a fable, a philosophical ghost meant to guard the borders of ethical thought. It does not tell us what is right, it tells us what to beware. And still there is a strange tenderness in the paradox, because at its heart it is about the value of joy. The desire to spread happiness is noble, but it must be tempered by wisdom, by compassion, by a sense that each person, no matter how small their pleasures, deserves to be seen. The child with a toy, the elder with a memory, the stranger with a song. These joys may not be monstrous in scale, but they are real. They are enough. So what do we do with the utility monster? We sit with it. We let it trouble us. We let it peel back the easy answers. It reminds us that ethics is not mathematics, that morality is not a numbers game, that a world obsessed with maximizing might lose what is worth living for. Sometimes the right thing is not to give the most, but to give fairly, to ensure that no one is forgotten, not even in the face of greatness. In the end, the utility monster does not live in a cave or in a storybook. It lives in our systems, our choices, our debates. It lives in every moment where we must weigh one person's needs against another's. It whispers in our policies, our budgets, our priorities. But it also offers a gift, the chance to reflect, to think not only about what feels good, but about what is just, to move beyond utility and toward humanity. The experience machine. Close your eyes and imagine a machine. It's sleek, silent, perfect. When you step into it, it disappears from your awareness. Electrodes attach gently to your head, and in a moment, reality as you know it dissolves. Inside the machine, you live out your perfect life, not as a dream, not as a simulation you're aware of, but as a complete and immersive experience. Every sensation feels real. Every emotion is vivid. Every success, every joy, every connection unfolds exactly as you would wish. You never know it's a machine. You never feel the cables, the programming, or the wires. You only feel life. And it is flawless. This is Robert Nozick's Experience Machine, a philosophical thought experiment that asks a simple but unsettling question. If such a machine existed, one that could give you any experience you desired, would you plug in? Would you trade the messy, uncertain, and often painful reality for a perfectly crafted illusion? Or would you refuse, choosing the world as it is, with all its flaws and failures, simply because it is real? The question sounds theoretical, even futuristic, but its challenge is timeless. It asks us what really matters. Is it the quality of our experiences or the authenticity of our lives? If happiness could be artificially maintained, if pleasure could be guaranteed, if success could be manufactured, would we still long for something more? Something raw, uncertain, and true? Nozick presented the experience machine to critique hedonism, the idea that the highest good is pleasure and that the best life is the one with the most enjoyable experiences. According to hedonism, plugging into the machine should be the obvious choice. Why live with suffering, disappointment, and failure when you can have eternal satisfaction and joy without ever knowing it's fake? But most people recoil at this idea. Most hesitate, and that hesitation reveals something profound about what we value. We want more than just experiences, we want reality. We want to be someone, not just feel like we are. We want our relationships to be with real people, our struggles to lead to real growth, our victories to come from real effort. The machine can give us the sensation of love, but not the presence of another soul. It can simulate achievement, but not the courage it takes to try and fail. It can reproduce every feeling, but it cannot give us truth. And somewhere deep within us, we hunger for that truth more than for any pleasure. The experience machine forces us to reflect on the structure of our values. It divides our desires into two categories: how life feels and what life is. And in doing so, it draws a line between illusion and authenticity. Even if the illusion is flawless, it remains hollow. A scripted victory, no matter how exhilarating, is still a performance. A programmed friendship, no matter how comforting, lacks the spark of genuine unpredictability. There's a dignity in reality, in facing life as it comes, that no simulation can replicate. But the machine also seduces. It whispers that suffering is unnecessary, that fear, rejection, loss, all of it can be erased. In its place, endless joy, eternal novelty, perfect beauty, and for a moment we wonder, why not? Why should we cling to pain and limitation when we could float forever in joy? What if reality is overrated? What if the struggle is only meaningful because we've been taught to think it is? This is the tension at the heart of the experience machine. It's not just a question of ethics, but of identity. Who are we, really? Are we the sum of our pleasures, or the authors of our actions? If the machine can replicate every sensation, does it make the real world obsolete? Or does the very act of choosing the real, in spite of its flaws, make it more meaningful than any artificial paradise? The machine also raises questions about free will. Inside, you are not in control. Your experiences are carefully engineered. They may feel spontaneous, but they are not. You are the audience of a perfect illusion. Outside the machine, your choices shape the world. They ripple into the lives of others. They bring real consequences, real risks. The machine removes all danger, but also all responsibility. And perhaps we value responsibility more than we realize. Perhaps freedom, even when painful, is sweeter than safety. Think, too, of relationships. In the machine, you could have the ideal partner, loving, attentive, endlessly compatible, but it would not be a person, it would be a program. Real relationships are messy. They require patience, vulnerability, forgiveness. They involve another will, another heart, and that challenge is what makes them precious. Without the possibility of misunderstanding, of loss, there is no true connection. The machine may offer a mirror of love, but it cannot offer love itself. In real life, we grow, we change, we carry memories marked by struggle. The moments that shape us are often the hardest, the failures, the heartbreaks, the doubts. In the machine, growth is simulated, but it's not earned, it's designed. There's no risk, and without risk, there's no courage. Without courage, there's no story. And without story, who are we? The experience machine also speaks to modern life more than ever. Virtual realities grow more immersive. Social media offers curated identities. Algorithms predict and feed our desires. More and more, we live in mediated experience, filtered, adjusted, tailored. We build digital worlds around us. We choose comfort, convenience, escape. and the machine becomes less of a fantasy and more of a reflection. We are already, in subtle ways, plugging in, and so the question becomes urgent. Where do we draw the line? Would we know if we had already entered the machine? If our lives are shaped by dopamine hits, echo chambers, and surface-level pleasures? Are we truly living? Or are we tasting a version of reality that is increasingly artificial? The experience machine is no longer just a philosophical device. It is a metaphor for the age we live in and the choices we make now about authenticity, about attention, about meaning, our choices about whether to plug in or to wake up. Yet there's no simple answer. The machine is not evil. It offers comfort. It offers joy. For those in deep pain, it might even offer a kind of mercy. There is a place for escape, for retreat, for dreaming. Not every moment has to be raw and real, but the danger is forgetting the difference. Forgetting that the most meaningful pleasures are those grounded in truth, that even when the world disappoints, there is a beauty in its imperfection that no simulation can touch. In the end, the experience machine is not about rejecting pleasure. It is about asking what pleasure is for. Is it the goal of life, or a byproduct of living well? Is it something to chase, or something that arises naturally when we live with purpose, connection, and courage? Nozick challenges us to see that meaning cannot be programmed. That reality, with all its uncertainty, is worth embracing, not because it always feels good, but because it's real. So would you plug in? Would you surrender the unpredictable, flawed, and sometimes painful journey of life for a perfect illusion? Or would you choose to wake each day into a world where nothing is guaranteed, but everything is real? The machine stands before you, humming softly. The choice is yours. And in that choice, you define not just what you value, but who you are. The teletransportation paradox. Imagine a machine, smooth, humming, flawless in design. You step into it with a quiet breath, heart steady, eyes open. The door closes, and in a flash, without pain or movement, your body disappears. Instantly, in another location, hundreds or even thousands of miles away, another machine buzzes to life. Out steps someone who looks like you, sounds like you, remembers what you remember. They wave to familiar faces, speak in your voice, continue your plans. To the world, nothing has changed. You have been teleported, but the question lingers, are you still you? This is the teletransportation paradox, a haunting thought experiment that drifts along the border between identity and continuity. Most famously explored by philosopher Derek Parfit, it asks whether a person who steps into a teletransporter and emerges elsewhere is truly the same person or merely a perfect copy. The paradox is simple, but the implications cut deep. It forces us to ask what it means to be a self. Is it memory? Is it consciousness? Is it continuity of matter? And if the original is destroyed in the process, is that murder or just a change of address? The process begins with faith. You believe the machine will work, that your body will be disassembled, scanned, and transmitted, that your atoms will be rearranged somewhere new, exactly as they were. Your memories, your personality, your preferences, everything will be encoded and reconstructed. The you who steps out of the receiver will feel continuous, uninterrupted, unchanged. They will say, "Here I am," but the you who stepped in has been vaporized. Their body is gone. Their neurons are dust. What remains is a replica, identical in every way, except for one haunting absence: the original stream of consciousness. Imagine, instead, that the machine malfunctions. It copies you, but fails to destroy the original. Now there are two of you. One remains in the departure room. The other appears at the destination. Both insist they are you. Both recall your past. Both love what you love, but they cannot be the same. Which one is you? Which one owns your identity? Can both be valid continuations, or is one a shadow? This is where the paradox unfolds. Because we like to think of the self as a single thread, a continuous flow from birth to now, we imagine identity as a river, sometimes winding, sometimes still, but always flowing through the same body. But the teletransporter breaks that illusion. It suggests that identity might be like a pattern, replicable, movable, not tied to any one body. If that's true, then death and rebirth are separated only by nanoseconds. And if the copy is perfect, does it matter that the original is gone? Parfit argued that personal identity is not what matters most, that survival does not require strict numerical identity, but psychological continuity. If the person who emerges thinks, feels, and remembers as you do, then, for all practical purposes, they are you. The loss of the original is tragic only if we cling to the idea that identity is fixed. But if we loosen that grip, if we view the self as a series of overlapping connections, a web of memories, intentions, and consciousness, then the teletransported person is not a copy, but a continuation. Still, the thought is unsettling. Deep down, we sense a difference between moving your body across space and creating a new one entirely. We are uneasy with the idea of being replaced, even by something indistinguishable from ourselves. The paradox touches a primal fear, not just of death, but of being forgotten, overwritten, erased by a perfect stranger who believes they are us. And perhaps the real tension is not between two people, but between continuity and comfort. What makes you, you? Is it your body, the cells, the atoms, the scars? If so, then you are changing constantly. Your physical components are replaced over time. The atoms in your skin are not the same as they were a decade ago. Your body is a ship of Theseus, rebuilt slowly in place. If continuity of matter is not required, then what is? Is it your brain, your memories? But even memories fade, shift, and reassemble. Even the brain rewires itself. Still, we feel like the same person. The thread of I seems to persist, even when the fabric changes. And what if the machine made two copies, one in New York, one in Tokyo, both believing they are you? If identity is duplicable, then it is not exclusive. And if it's not exclusive, is it real? Or is it a convenient fiction, a useful story the mind tells itself to keep order? The paradox pulls at the seams of that story, revealing the fragility of selfhood. It suggests that you might be less like a substance and more like a flame, transferable, extinguishable, reignitable. This thought experiment also resonates with our digital age. In the world of virtual avatars, uploaded memories, artificial intelligence, we are already toying with the idea of replicated minds. What if your thoughts could be uploaded into a server, animated by algorithms, given a voice and a face? Would that be you? Would it comfort your loved ones? Or would it be a mimic, repeating your words like an echo through an empty hall? The teletransportation paradox is not just about science fiction, it's about meaning. It asks whether the self is an object or an illusion, whether consciousness is a stream or a script, whether death is final or just the end of one performance before the next actor steps onto the stage, reciting your lines with your voice in a body shaped like yours. It challenges our desire for permanence in a world built on impermanence. But there is beauty here too, because if identity is not tied to matter, then perhaps it is more resilient than we thought. If what matters is psychological continuity, then we are less alone in our becoming. We are not the same person we were years ago, and yet we continue. The person you are now carries echoes of who you were and seeds of who you will become. Even without a machine, you are always teleporting across time, across change, across the mysterious terrain of your own mind. In the silence of thought, the paradox becomes a kind of meditation, a reminder that life is fragile, that selfhood is mysterious, and that consciousness is perhaps the greatest of all wonders. The machine does not exist, but the questions it raises are real. Each morning, you wake into a world where you are slightly different. Each night, you sleep as someone who will not return in quite the same way. And yet you continue, not by logic, not by certainty, but by trust in the thread, in the flame, in the name you continue to carry forward. So would you step into the teletransporter? Would you risk the possibility that the person who emerges is not you, but someone who believes they are? Or would you remain where you are, rooted in the familiar continuity of body and breath? There is no right answer, only reflection, only the quiet, haunting question, what is it that makes you Parfit's split-brain fission? Imagine waking up one day with a choice before you, one not rooted in the ordinary dilemmas of life, but in the edges of metaphysics. Doctors inform you that due to an advancing condition, your brain will be damaged unless a radical procedure is done. They propose to take your brain, divide it, and place each half into a new, healthy body. Both hemispheres are intact. Both retain your memories, your values, your sense of humor, your fears and your dreams. After the operation, two people awaken, each claiming to be you, each insisting they are the rightful continuation of your consciousness. This is the split-brain fission paradox, introduced by philosopher Derek Parfit, and it gently unravels everything we think we know about identity, survival, and what it means to be a self. At first, the idea sounds impossible. Surely you can't survive as two people. Identity is supposed to be singular, continuous, a line drawn from birth to death. But Parfit's thought experiment challenges this deeply held assumption. He asks, what matters in survival? Is it the continued existence of one biological body? Is it the presence of one brain? Or is it something else entirely, perhaps the preservation of psychological continuity, the thread of thoughts, memories, intentions that carry you forward in time? In the split-brain fission case, both resulting individuals are psychologically continuous with you. They remember your childhood. They know your favorite book. They grieve the loss of your parents. They feel a familiar affection for your friends, your home, your life. If you were shown both of them, you might feel a strange recognition, like looking into a mirror that had somehow doubled its reflection. But you cannot be both. And so the question arises, if both survive, do you survive? Or do you somehow cease to be? Parfit's radical claim is that personal identity is not what matters most. He suggests that survival does not require the preservation of a single self. Instead, what truly matters is the continuity of psychological features, the overlapping of memory, character, and consciousness. If those are preserved, then survival has occurred, even if identity becomes blurred or divided. This view, often called the reductionist view of personal identity, shifts the focus from the self as a singular essence to the self as a pattern, one that can, in theory, split and still remain meaningful. The paradox becomes even more poignant when you consider the implications. If one of the post-operation individuals is you and the other is not, how would you decide which one? They are both equally qualified. They both feel your identity in their bones. But if both are you, then identity is not singular, it's divisible. And if neither is you, despite being indistinguishable from you, then identity is an illusion, a construct we use for convenience, not a fact we can point to. There's a moment of quiet unease here, the kind that only emerges when familiar categories begin to dissolve. We like to think of ourselves as indivisible, as whole. But Parfit gently shows us that this might be more of a story than a truth. That what we call the self might be a process, not a thing. A cloud, not a stone. Something that continues through connection, not. This idea doesn't just live in abstract philosophy, it echoes in real neuroscience, in cases of split brain patients where the corpus callosum, the bridge between the brain's hemispheres, is severed. Strange things begin to happen. One hand buttons a shirt while the other unbuttons it. One hemisphere can name an object while the other cannot. It seems that within a single skull, there are multiple centers of experience, multiple streams of thought. The self begins to fragment, revealing that unity was never as complete as we assume. And yet, in daily life we feel whole. We speak with one voice, we move with one will. This, Parfit argues, is enough. We don't need a metaphysical core to be real. We don't need an unchanging self to live meaningful lives. What matters is that our experiences are connected, that our values endure, that our relationships grow and deepen. The illusion of singular identity may be comforting, but it is not necessary for love, for memory, for continuity of care. Still, the emotional pull of identity is hard to shake. If you knew this procedure was scheduled tomorrow, if you knew that tomorrow there would be two of you, but that you yourself would not wake up, would you feel at peace? Would you feel that survival had been achieved? Or would you mourn yourself in advance, knowing that while two continuations of your mind would exist, you would not experience them? This is the heart of the paradox. It doesn't provide a clean answer. It reveals the discomfort between intellectual understanding and personal instinct. There is also a deeper ethical question woven within the thought experiment. If both post-fission individuals believe they are you, and each wants access to your relationships, your career, your property, who has the right? If identity is not fixed, then what does justice require? How do we honor both parts of a formerly singular life? How do we speak to love and grief and memory when the lines of selfhood blur? Parfit believed that understanding this paradox could change how we live, that if we truly accept that identity is not what matters most, we might take life less personally, we might fear death less, we might let go of the need to preserve a solid, unbroken self, and instead focus on what connects us to others, on continuity of care, on overlapping concern, on the things that extend beyond us and ripple through the lives of those we touch. In this way, the split brain fission paradox is not just about self, it's about others. If identity can divide, then perhaps empathy can expand. If the boundaries of personhood are porous, then maybe we are not so separate after all. Maybe the self is not a fortress, but a thread, woven through memory and meaning, looping through the minds of those we love, shared in stories and smiles and silent acts of kindness. There's also a strange kind of freedom in this view. If the self is a process, not a possession, then we are always becoming. We are not trapped by our past selves. We are not bound to a fixed essence. We are fluid, evolving, adapting. The self becomes a river, not a statue. And this river can split, merge, change course, and still be real. So what, then, do we do with this paradox? We carry it. We let it soften our grip on certainty. We let it open us to the mystery of our own minds. We stop asking who we are and begin asking who we are becoming. We stop fearing the loss of a fixed identity and begin nurturing the threads that weave our lives together. The memories, the values, the intentions, the laughter that echoes in the minds of those who know us, the kindness that continues even if our form does not. Parfit's split-brain fission is not meant to be solved, it is meant to be lived with. Like a poem, it reveals its meaning not through answers but through presence. It invites us to look at ourselves not as singular, isolated beings, but as constellations of consciousness, moving, multiplying, fading, and reforming across time. And so, as we drift into the quiet questions of evening, we can hold the paradox like a candle, not to chase away the dark, but to see by its flickering light, to notice the beauty in not knowing, to feel the wonder of being a self, not fixed, but free, not one, but many, and always, always becoming. Davidson's Swamp Man. Picture a man named Donald, walking through the swamp. He is thoughtful, absorbed in the quiet rustle of the trees, the squish of wet ground beneath his boots. Without warning, lightning strikes him dead. In that same instant, a bizarre natural phenomenon occurs. From the gases, particles, and plant matter of the swamp, a creature rises. It is atom for atom identical to Donald. It looks like him, speaks like him. Remember, it believes it has a family, a job, a past, but it has no history. It was formed by chance, not evolution or experience. This is Davidson's Swamp Man, a being who, for all appearances, is Donald, yet lacks any real past, and with that absence the mind begins to shiver. Is this Swamp Man truly a person? Can it have beliefs, intentions, or knowledge? Or is it a hollow echo of the man it resembles? Philosopher Donald Davidson proposed this thought experiment not to create a monster, but to pose a question about meaning and mental content. If meaning arises from interaction with the world, if our words and thoughts depend on our history, then what do we make of a being that has none? The Swamp Man speaks English but has never learned it. It writes poetry but has never read. It greets you with familiarity, though it has never met you. What, then, grounds its mind? We tend to think of consciousness as internal, a private theater of thoughts and emotions. But Davidson's Swamp Man turns the lens outward. It suggests that meaning is not merely in the head, that thoughts are shaped by causal history, by encounters, memories, conversations. The Swamp Man has no such background. No causal chain connects its utterances to the world. When it says tree, the word emerges not from years of seeing and touching trees, but from a sudden random configuration of neurons. And so, Davidson asks, can it mean anything at all? At first, the Swampman feels like a strange cousin to the philosophical zombie. Another entity that walks and talks like us, but lacks some essential inner element. But the Swampman is not about feeling or consciousness. It's about representation. Can a being that arises spontaneously, without history or context, truly refer to things in the world? Can it believe something to be true? Can it know anything? Davidson's answer is quietly unsettling. No, he says. Not in the same way we can. This shakes our intuitions. The swamp man looks like a person. It behaves like a person. Isn't that enough? But Davidson presses further. He reminds us that understanding is not just about internal structure. It's about the relationship between structure and world. Our words mean things because they come from something, because we've used them in specific contexts, across time, to interact with the world. The swampman has no such history. Its words float, unanchored. It is like a book written in a language no one has taught, perfectly formed, but lacking the roots that give words life. This raises a deep question about what it means to be a person. Is personhood something you are born into, or something you build through time? If the swampman cannot refer, cannot mean, cannot know, then is it truly a mind? Or is it a beautifully constructed automaton, simulating humanity without ever entering it? And yet, when we imagine the swampman waking, looking around, speaking softly, feeling fear or wonder, we cannot help but feel that something is there. It acts with purpose. It reflects. It feels real. So is Davidson wrong? Or is he showing us the difference between seeming and being, between structure and story? In a world increasingly shaped by artificial intelligence, the swamp man becomes more than a fantasy. It becomes a metaphor, a mirror. When we build machines that generate language, create art, hold conversations, are we building minds? Or are we building swamp men? Entities that speak without history, that write without memory, that simulate understanding without context? The swamp man doesn't just test our theories of meaning, it tests our empathy. If something acts like a person, should we treat it as one? Or is there a moral line between the truly human and the merely human-shaped? If the swamp man looks at you with sorrow, do you comfort it? If it asks for friendship, do you offer it? Or do you turn away, whispering that it has no soul, no past, no right? Davidson's puzzle stretches the boundaries of selfhood. It suggests that what we are is more than flesh, more than thought. It is rooted in the dance between inner life and outer world, in the trail we leave as we move through time. Without that trail, we may have consciousness, but not content, experience, but not meaning. The swamp man, then, is a lesson in humility, a reminder that minds are not merely built, they are lived. And yet, paradoxically, the swamp man also teaches us something beautiful. If meaning arises through history, then our lives, our conversations, our memories, our mistakes, are what give our thoughts their power. It is not just the words we say, but how we came to say them that matters. Each encounter, each heartbreak, each small act of kindness is not just experience, it is construction. It is the forging of a mind. So what do we make of the swamp man? Is it an empty shell or a mind in waiting? Some argue that with time it could become a person, that if it walks the world, forms new memories, learns new meanings, it may build a mind from scratch. That personhood is not a moment, but a process. Not a switch, but a journey. In that view, the swamp man is not a paradox, it is a beginning. But Davidson resists this comfort. He insists that meaning is not just built forward, but also anchored backward, that what makes a word mean something is not just how it's used today, but how it came to be. The swamp man, lacking this past, is a philosophical ghost. It walks and speaks, but casts no shadow on the world behind it. Still, the paradox refuses to settle. Like all great thought experiments, it leaves us suspended between perspectives, between the pull of form and the weight of history, between the appearance of mind and the roots of meaning. It doesn't give us answers, it gives us a lens, a way to see our own minds more clearly. to see that we are not just machines of thought, but creatures of history, that every word we speak carries the fingerprints of our past. So as you move through your own life, your own trail of moments and meanings, remember what the swamp man lacks. Remember that your words are not just vibrations, but echoes of everything you've lived. That your mind is not a static form, but a growing pattern shaped by experience. That you are not merely a being, but a becoming. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is what makes us real. Not our structure, not our appearance, but our connection to the world. The way we reach outward, the way we remember, the way we mean. The swamp man cannot look backward, but you can, and in doing so you bring life to your thoughts, weight to your words, and depth to your existence. Thompson's Violinist. Imagine waking up in a dim, quiet hospital room. Your eyes open slowly. You feel a dull ache in your side and wires extending from your body. As your mind clears, a doctor enters the room and calmly explains, "While you were unconscious, members of the Society of Music Lovers kidnapped you. They connected your circulatory system to a famous violinist, an artist suffering from a fatal kidney ailment. You are the only match. For the next 9 months, he must remain plugged into your body to survive. If you disconnect, he will die. If you stay, he will live. But this is your body, your life, and you never agreed to this. What should you do?" This is Judith Jarvis Thomson's famous thought experiment, introduced in 1971 as a challenge to certain arguments against abortion. But its reach goes far beyond that specific debate. The violinist is not just a metaphor. He is a window into the ethics of bodily autonomy, consent, responsibility, and the limits of moral obligation. The question it poses is quiet but relentless. Are you morally obligated to sustain the life of another, even at great cost to yourself, simply because you can? At first, the answer seems clear. Most people feel a deep, intuitive resistance to being forced into such a situation. The violinist is a person. He is innocent. He will die without you. And yet, you did not choose this. You were not asked. You were not warned. The burden was placed upon you without consent, and even though detaching would cause his death, your action would not be one of direct harm, but of withdrawal. You would not be killing him. You would be letting him die. Is there a moral difference? Thomson argues that there is. She suggests that while it might be kind, even heroic, to remain connected, it is not morally obligatory, that no one should be required to use their body to sustain another's life without consent. Her point is not to diminish the violinist's life, but to illuminate yours, to show that moral worth does not come from sacrifice alone, but from choice, and that the right to life does not include the right to use someone else's body. This distinction matters because in our daily moral thinking, we often assume that life must be preserved at all costs. But Thomson asks us to pause, to consider the person being asked to give, to ask whether morality includes the right to say no. She's not claiming that all forms of withdrawal are good, only that they can be morally permissible, even when the consequences are tragic. That sometimes the boundary of the body is sacred, even in the face of death. The violinist is persuasive. He is talented. He has fans, perhaps even a family. He did not ask to be sick. He did not ask to be connected to you. And yet, his life now depends entirely on your body. In some ways, this makes the decision even harder because no one is evil here. No one is at fault. There is only circumstance and the impossible weight of ethical tension. In this way, the thought experiment moves beyond abortion. It asks a broader question: when do we owe others the use of ourselves? Do parents owe their organs to their children? Do strangers owe blood, or marrow, or time? At what point does kindness become duty, and when does that duty end? The violinist becomes a mirror for all moments when we are asked to give more than we want, more than we can, more than we consented to give. The beauty of Thompson's argument is that it does not demand certainty. It invites reflection. It does not say, disconnect. It says, you may. It opens a door to moral nuance, a place where compassion can exist alongside autonomy. It shows that being moral is not always about doing the most for others, but about recognizing where the boundaries of the self begin and end. Consider, too, the nature of consent. If you had agreed in advance to support the violinist, the picture would shift. Consent transforms obligation. Voluntary sacrifice carries a different moral weight. But here you were given no choice. You were used. And the question becomes not what you could do, but what you must do. And that distinction lies at the heart of personal liberty. There is also a quiet commentary on how we perceive responsibility. If the violinist had been your sibling, would it change things? If you had caused his condition, would that create a moral debt? Thompson explores these variations in her essay, noting that even when we grant greater responsibility, we still must grapple with the right to bodily integrity. That moral obligation does not erase the importance of self-possession. The image of the violinist, fragile, sleeping, dependent, stays with us. It reminds us that the stakes are real, that behind every ethical puzzle is a human life. And yet, the strength of the thought experiment is that it asks us to balance empathy with ethics, to ask how we value lives without erasing the life of the one who is asked to give. And then there's the silence, the long, difficult silence that follows when we realize there are no perfect answers, that sometimes being moral means navigating heartbreak, that sometimes we must choose between two goods or two harms. The violinist lies quietly, unaware of the burden placed upon you, and you sit beside him, with your own heart beating against the weight of impossible decisions. The point, perhaps, is not to find a universal rule, but to awaken a deeper moral awareness, to notice how our intuitions shift when context changes, to recognize that ethics is not a grid of cold calculations, but a living dialogue between rights and compassion, between self and other. The violinist does not demand a verdict. He asks us to reflect on what it means to be human. In the end, Thompson's violinist is not just about pregnancy, or sacrifice, or autonomy. It is about freedom, the freedom to choose what we give and what we withhold, the freedom to say yes and the freedom to say no. It honors the complexity of our moral lives, where love and justice, empathy and liberty often pull in opposite directions. So what would you do? Would you stay connected, letting your body carry the weight of another life? Would you unplug, walking away with sorrow but certainty? There is no answer that fits all, only the quiet space between action and belief, where each of us must listen to the whisper of our own conscience. Newcomb's paradox. Imagine you walk into a quiet, sterile room. In front of you on a table are two boxes, one transparent, one opaque. The transparent box clearly contains $1,000. The opaque one, its contents hidden from view, may contain $1 million or nothing at all. You are told the rules by a calm voice over a speaker. You may choose to take both boxes or only the opaque one. But before you choose, you are told that a highly reliable predictor, perhaps an almost omniscient superintelligence, has already made a prediction about your decision. If the predictor has forecast that you will take both boxes, it has left the opaque one empty. If it has predicted you will take only the opaque one, it has placed $1 million inside. The predictor has never been wrong. The question is simple: what do you choose? This is Newcomb's paradox, a riddle that sits at the intersection of free will, determinism, prediction, and decision theory. It does not trap you in logic. It invites you into it. It presents you with two apparently conflicting principles. One is the principle of dominance. Take both boxes and you are guaranteed more money. The other is the principle of expected utility. If the predictor is always right, the best outcome follows from taking only the opaque box. Rational thought bends in both directions. And somewhere in the silence between those thoughts, you are left wondering, can your choice influence the past? From a certain angle, it seems obvious. The prediction is already made. The contents of the box are fixed. Whether there's $1 million in the opaque box or not was determined before you even walked into the room. You can't change the past. You can't change what's already in the box. So why not take both? After all, if the opaque box has the $1 million, you get that plus the $1,000. If it doesn't, you still walk away with something. Choosing both seems to dominate. It seems rational. You might walk away smirking, confident in your logic. But then comes the unease. The whisper that something is missing. The predictor's history is perfect. Every time someone has chosen both boxes, they've found the opaque one empty. Every time someone has chosen only the opaque box, they've found it full. Not once has this pattern been broken. You begin to feel the weight of that history, the presence of something deeper than logic, something like trust or surrender. You wonder if rationality, as you understand it, is enough. Newcomb's paradox exposes a fracture in our thinking. We assume the world is static, that choices operate forward in time. But what if the act of choosing is itself entangled in prediction? What if your future action is so deeply linked to the predictor's model of you that to act is to fulfill the prediction? This is not retrocausality. It's not that your decision changes the past. It's that the predictor knows you so well, your very nature ensures its accuracy. You are not influencing the past, you are revealing who you were always going to be. In this sense, the paradox becomes a mirror. It reflects back your assumptions about freedom and determinism. Do you believe you are free to choose? Or do you believe your choice is written in the lines of your mind, your past, your preferences? If the predictor is infallible, then your choice is not free, it is foreseen. But if you are truly free, then the predictor cannot be perfect. The paradox lives in this tension, never resolving, only deepening. Decision theorists are divided. Some follow the strategy called two-boxing, based on the dominance principle. They argue that since the boxes are already filled, your choice cannot change the contents. Others endorse one-boxing, based on the predictor's reliability. They say that by one-boxing, you are demonstrating the kind of mind the predictor rewards. You are stepping into a pattern, aligning with the conditions of success. Neither side concedes. Both claim the mantle of reason. But beneath the technical arguments lies something more intimate, a question not just of logic but of identity. What kind of agent are you? Are you the kind of person who trusts the predictor, who aligns with the path that leads to the best outcome? Or are you the kind who acts independently, who grabs both boxes because you believe in what you can see? The paradox becomes a psychological test. It measures not only what you believe about the world, but what you believe about yourself. And then there's the quiet beauty of the paradox, the way it blurs the line between causality and correlation, the way it turns prediction into a force that shapes the future, even though it seems to describe the past. The way it invites you to sit with uncertainty, not to solve it, but to feel it, to live with the strange truth that some of our most rational decisions lead to failure, while others, based on trust and pattern, lead to reward. Some interpret Newcomb's paradox as a metaphor, a lesson in the power of belief or faith or self-fulfilling prophecy. Others see it as a flaw in how we frame decisions, a breakdown in classical models of rationality. Still others see it as a doorway into deeper questions about the nature of the self, the predictability of the mind, the structure of time. It is not a riddle to be answered, but a space to think inside. Imagine now that you are not choosing for money, but for something greater, for peace, for truth, for love. And the predictor, still perfect, still silent, waits for you to decide. What kind of life do you want to walk into? One where you follow what seems logical, or one where you follow what leads to fullness, to the best outcome, even if the path feels strange? The paradox becomes not just a game, but a philosophy. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of Newcomb's paradox. Not that it teaches us how to win, but that it reveals how we choose, that it shows us the architecture of our own minds, the rules we play by, the beliefs we trust, the fears we obey. It invites us to notice when we cling to control and when we surrender to something greater. It reminds us that sometimes wisdom lives not in calculation, but in letting go. So what will you do? Will you take both boxes, certain that your gain is fixed, your logic unassailable? Or will you take only the opaque box, trusting in the pattern, stepping into the unknown? The room is quiet, the boxes wait, and your decision, whispered silently in the chambers of your mind, echoes backward and forward in time. Kafka's Toxin Puzzle. Imagine a peculiar offer. You are approached by a billionaire philosopher-scientist with a strange proposition. If by midnight tonight you form the intention to drink a certain toxin tomorrow at noon, you will receive $1 million. The toxin won't kill you, it won't even make you sick for long, it will only cause intense discomfort for one day. But here's the catch. You do not need to actually drink the toxin to receive the money. You only need to genuinely, sincerely intend to drink it when the time comes. The money is transferred to your account at midnight the moment the intention is formed, based on a perfect brain scanner that detects mental states with flawless precision. But once you have the money, what incentive remains to follow through? This is Gregory Kafka's Toxin Puzzle, a deceptively simple thought experiment that quietly undoes our assumptions about intention, rationality, and commitment. On the surface, it looks like a game of ethics or decision theory, but at its heart, the puzzle probes a deeper mystery. Can we choose to intend something we have no reason to do? Is intention something we command directly, like moving a hand? Or does it emerge only when the reasons are aligned with future action? You sit in a room, thinking. It's 11:30 p.m. You want the $1 million. You have no objection to a day of discomfort if it means achieving your goal. But you also know that once the money arrives, the rational thing will be to skip the toxin. There will be no further gain, only suffering. So you try to form the intention. You repeat the words, "I will drink the toxin." You imagine yourself lifting the glass. You even write a note to remind yourself. But deep down, you wonder, do you really mean it? The scanner is perfect. It cannot be fooled. It doesn't read your behavior or your words or your facial expressions. It reads the structure of your mental state, your genuine intention. It knows when you truly plan to do something and when you're merely pretending. The problem is not deception. The problem is self-deception. Can you really make yourself believe something that your rational mind does not support? Intention, in this light, is not just a promise to yourself. It is a bridge between belief and action. It arises not from fantasy or willpower alone, but from coherence. The mind does not form genuine intentions without aligning them to future incentives. And yet, to get the money, you must intend to drink the toxin, even though you know you will have no reason to follow through. Kafka's puzzle becomes a paradox of motivation, a riddle of sincerity. This isn't a story about tricking others. It's about the strange limits of our own self-control, about how even when we want to want something, even when we see the value in a particular outcome, we might still fail to align our inner machinery to make it happen. The intention must be real, but our mind resists making it real without the proper cause. You're not being irrational. That's the paradox. Some have suggested pre-commitment strategies. Maybe you could sign a contract with yourself. Ask a friend to ensure you drink the toxin. Lock yourself in a room with only the toxin and no escape. But these workarounds all shift the problem. They change the nature of the puzzle. The billionaire wants only one thing: your intention, not your action, not your planning, just your inner decision, formed cleanly with no coercion, no trap. Can you do it? And here we begin to see the elegance of the problem. Kafka isn't asking whether you'll drink the toxin. He's asking whether you can, at will, create a mental state that your rational mind finds unjustifiable. Whether you can align the internal with the external when the two are no longer synchronized by expected outcomes. The intention is valuable before midnight, but worthless after. Can your mind treat it as valuable enough to make it real, even knowing its temporary nature? This exposes something fundamental about how we experience time and decision-making. We think of ourselves as planners, projecting our will forward into the future. But intention lives in a peculiar space. It looks ahead, but it's built from the present. It requires a kind of imaginative trust, a belief that our future selves will follow through. In Kafka's world, that trust breaks down. You cannot rely on your future self, because your future self will have no reason to suffer, and knowing that weakens the bridge of intention. The past and the future no longer agree. This is not just a philosophical puzzle, it's a lived experience. We've all faced versions of the toxin, the diet we intend to start, the promise we plan to keep, the alarm we intend to wake up to. We tell ourselves we will follow through, but we know that when the moment comes, our motivations might vanish. The problem isn't that we lie to ourselves. It's that we struggle to truly believe the promise of discomfort when the reward has already been claimed. In that sense, the toxin puzzle is about integrity, not moral, but psychological. The coherence between what we think now and what we will do later. When the future breaks that coherence, intention falters. We discover that sincerity is not just a matter of will, but of structure, and that our deepest intentions depend on harmony between desire, reason, and time. So what would it take to form the intention? Could you hypnotize yourself? Could you develop a kind of self-induced amnesia, forgetting that the money arrives before the action? Could you train your mind to care about follow-through even when the benefit is gone? These questions stretch the boundaries of free will. They ask whether we truly control our minds or whether we are passengers in a system of incentives and feedback loops. And perhaps most haunting of all, the puzzle asks whether intention is ever under our command. We often believe we can form goals, make plans, chart a course, but Kafka suggests a limitation, that unless the future is aligned, the present cannot fully commit, that intentions cannot be willed into existence by desire alone. They require a scaffold of rational expectation, and once that scaffold is gone, the structure collapses. The toxin puzzle also stirs something else, our relationship to integrity. Even if the action no longer makes sense, some might still choose to drink the toxin out of principle. To honor the intention even when it's no longer useful. To prove that we are more than rational agents, that we are bound by more than utility, that there is value in keeping our word even if only to ourselves. This impulse reveals a kind of moral identity, a self that desires consistency more than comfort. But is this truly rational, or is it another illusion, another performance we give to preserve a sense of control? Kafka does not answer. He simply shows us the stage. The glass of toxin sits on the table, the money is already in the bank, and the question echoes in the silence. Will you drink? In the end, Kafka's toxin puzzle doesn't just confuse, it reveals. It shows us that the mind is not a command center, but a conversation, that we do not always control our intentions as we believe, that sincerity is more fragile than it seems, and that the architecture of thought is shaped by forces beyond desire. So the next time you make a promise to yourself, pause. Ask not only what you want, but whether your mind believes the future will honor it. Listen for the quiet resistance, the place where intention stutters, where desire meets doubt. That is the space where the toxin lives. That is the moment where integrity is tested. The philosophical zombie. Imagine walking through your neighborhood on a cool, quiet evening. The sun has dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretch across sidewalks and fences. You see your neighbor step outside. She waves, smiles, says hello. Her voice is calm, her tone familiar. You ask her how she's been. She replies with warmth, gestures smoothly, laughs at your jokes. From all appearances, she is a person alert, responsive, thoughtful. But now imagine something impossible. Imagine she has no inner world, no consciousness, no feelings, no sensations. Her smile is not backed by joy, her words not guided by thought. There is nothing it's like to be her. She is what philosophers call a zombie, not the undead of horror films, but a being indistinguishable from a human in behavior, yet utterly empty inside. This is the idea of the philosophical zombie, or P-zombie, a creature who looks, sounds, and acts just like you or me, but lacks subjective experience. There's no light behind its eyes, no presence behind its words. It processes stimuli, responds appropriately, even claims to be conscious, but it is not. There is no what it's like to be the zombie. It is dark inside. This thought experiment, popularized by philosopher David Chalmers, is not a claim about reality. It's a tool, a way to investigate the mystery of consciousness by asking if it's logically possible for a being to behave like a human without consciousness. Then what does that say about the nature of our minds? The puzzle starts with a question. Why does consciousness exist at all? Why aren't we just complex biological machines, processing inputs, calculating responses, navigating the world without any inner glow? Evolution could, in theory, produce beings who function perfectly without needing to feel anything. The zombie acts like a person, talks like a person, even insists it has feelings. But all of that is just behavior. There's no inner experience, no pain, no joy, just the appearance of mind. When we consider this possibility, something cracks open. We begin to see that consciousness isn't necessary for behavior, not in the strictest logical sense. We can imagine a creature doing everything we do, minus awareness, and yet we feel certain that our own consciousness is real. We feel pain, we savor tastes, we are aware of beauty, of grief, of thought itself. This makes consciousness seem both undeniable and unnecessary, a strange, shimmering addition to the machinery of life. This is what Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. Not how the brain processes information, or how we move our limbs or recognize faces. Those are the easy problems, even if they're complex. The hard problem is this: how and why does all that processing give rise to experience? Why doesn't it just happen in the dark? What turns a system of neurons into a field of awareness? The philosophical zombie is a challenge to physicalism, the view that everything about the mind can be explained in terms of physical processes. If a zombie is logically possible, then physical description does not exhaust mental reality, because if two beings can be physically identical, but only one has consciousness, then consciousness must be something more than the physical, something extra, something hidden. And yet this thought feels strange. How could something that doesn't exist in any physical way still be real, still matter? The zombie idea forces us to choose: either deny that zombies are possible and accept that consciousness is fully physical, or accept the zombie and believe that consciousness transcends the physical. Neither path feels easy. Each carries its own mystery. Some philosophers reject the zombie as incoherent. They argue that if you strip away consciousness, you inevitably change behavior, that a true zombie with no awareness at all wouldn't smile or speak or cry, that our subjective states are not just inner ornaments, but part of what causes us to act. In this view, consciousness is not optional. It is woven into the fabric of our responses. You cannot have the outer without the inner. Others insist that the zombie is not only conceivable, but illuminating, that by imagining its possibility, we learn how different consciousness is from all other features of reality. No matter how much we know about the brain, its regions, its circuits, its chemistry, we cannot derive the feeling of red, the ache of loneliness, the taste of lemon. They are things you are. They are things you are. They are what it's like to be alive. And that's the haunting power of the zombie. It forces us to confront the gap between what we can describe from the outside and what we feel on the inside. It reveals the limits of objectivity. No matter how closely we observe someone, no matter how detailed our scan, we cannot see their experience. We can see their tears, but not their sorrow. We can hear their words, but not their meanings. We can measure their heartbeat, but not their fear. The zombie also invites questions about empathy. If a creature acted like a person but lacked awareness, would we still care for it? Would we grant it rights? Or is our compassion rooted in the belief that others feel as we do? In that sense, the zombie is also an ethical challenge. It asks what matters more, behavior or experience. If a being feels nothing, does it matter how it is treated? Or is consciousness the very thing that gives moral weight to existence? There's something quiet and eerie about the thought. The idea that someone could walk beside you, speak with your voice, echo your thoughts, and yet be empty. Not evil, just blank. Hollow. It makes you grateful for your own inner life, for the fact that you don't just act, you feel, you dream, you reflect, and it reminds you how much of life is built on trust. Trust that others are conscious like you, that their words are not just sounds but signals from a living core. But how do we know? How do we know that others are not zombies? We assume they're not because they behave like us, but we cannot prove their inner world exists. We infer it. We believe it. Because the alternative is too lonely, too cold. And so, we live by a kind of faith. Faith in shared subjectivity, in the hidden glow behind each face. The zombie problem also touches on the future. As we build machines that mimic human thought, we edge closer to creating beings that could, in theory, pass for conscious. If an AI smiles, laughs, expresses love, do we believe it feels anything? Or is it a zombie, cleverly programmed? The line between appearance and experience grows thinner. And the question grows louder: what makes something truly alive? And yet, perhaps the zombie is not meant to be real. Perhaps it is only a shadow, a contrast that helps us see more clearly what we are. By imagining the absence of consciousness, we come to appreciate its presence. The feeling of a breeze on your skin, the color of the sky, the quiet ache in your chest when you remember something lost. These moments cannot be replicated. They cannot be faked. They are not data, they are life. So where does this leave us? The zombie stands as a question, not an answer. It whispers that consciousness may never be fully explained, that it may remain, forever, a mystery wrapped in light. But it also invites us to marvel, to sit in wonder at the fact that we are not zombies, that we feel that behind our eyes there is something looking out, something aware, something alive, and maybe that's enough. Not to solve the problem, but to feel its depth. To know that whatever the answer, consciousness is real. It matters. It is the most intimate truth we possess, not because we can explain it, but because we are it. Last Thursdayism. Imagine that everything you know, your memories, your relationships, your history, your body, the world, came into existence exactly 1 week ago, last Thursday. You were not born decades ago. You were created fully formed, with every memory implanted, every scar carefully etched into your skin, every photograph in your phone arranged just so. The earth itself, with all its fossils, museums, and ancient ruins, was crafted in that instant, as though it had always been there. The universe, with its billion-year-old stars and galaxies stretched across space, was assembled in perfect detail, already old, already aged, already spinning. This is the idea behind Last Thursdayism, a philosophical hypothesis that suggests the entire universe may have been created last Thursday, with all appearances of age, history, and continuity baked in from the beginning. At first glance, it feels like a joke, a playful nudge at the seriousness of metaphysical thought. But beneath its surface lies a deep and haunting question. How do we know the past is real? We remember it, of course. We have evidence, books, photos, fossils, wrinkles. But what if all that evidence was part of the creation? What if every sign of the past is simply an illusion, something created to look old but without actual history? How would we know the difference? The unsettling power of Last Thursdayism is that it cannot be disproven. Any argument you use to refute it, any memory you summon, any document you cite, could have been placed there at the moment of creation. The very tools of evidence collapse under the weight of the theory. You cannot reach into the past to verify it. You can only examine the present, and if the present was constructed to mimic a past that never happened, then everything you believe about your life may be fiction. This idea is not new. It echoes older philosophical puzzles. The French philosopher René Descartes wondered if an evil demon was deceiving him, creating a false world in his mind. Bishop George Berkeley questioned whether matter exists at all outside perception. Bertrand Russell proposed a similar notion to last Thursdayism with his 5-minute hypothesis. The idea that the universe could have been created 5 minutes ago with everyone's memories and impressions intact. Each of these thought experiments does the same thing. They pry open the gap between appearance and reality and invite us to step inside. What makes last Thursdayism so quietly disturbing is its ordinariness. It does not propose a surreal simulation or a hostile demon. It suggests that the world you know, the streets you walk, the voice of your mother, the ache in your knees, might have no past beyond a few days. And yet, it feels so real, so consistent, so continuous. The contradiction creates a kind of existential vertigo. If everything I remember is false, then what am I? Who am I? And here we reach the heart of the paradox. If the world was created last Thursday, and if all your memories were fabricated, does it even matter? You remember your childhood, you feel it in your bones. The past shapes your emotions, your fears, your dreams. Even if it's false, it's real to you. Does that make it any less meaningful? Is there a difference between a memory that really happened and a memory that feels like it did? Some would argue that meaning comes from continuity, that what matters is not when the world began, but how it flows. If your relationships, your ideas, your identity remain stable, then the moment of creation is irrelevant. Whether your history stretches back decades or was constructed in an instant, you still experience it the same way. You still love, hope, grieve, and perhaps that is enough. But others feel a sense of loss. If the past is not real, then what have I overcome? What have I become? If my memories are not mine, then is my growth an illusion? The achievements, the trauma, the wisdom gathered through years, all of it may be staged, a backdrop, a fabrication designed to make me feel like I've lived. And that possibility can create a strange hollowness. Yet perhaps that hollowness is also a kind of freedom. If nothing before last Thursday truly happened, then you are not as bound by your past as you thought. You are not chained to your mistakes. You are not the prisoner of your former self. You are, in a sense, newly born, fresh, untainted, untouched by time. The slate is blank, even if it appears to be covered in ink. And that can be liberating. Last Thursdayism also whispers something profound about trust. We live by trust, not just in people, but in time. We trust that the sun rose yesterday, even if we didn't see it. We trust that history unfolded as we were taught. We trust that when we close our eyes, the world continues. Without that trust, meaning becomes slippery, reality becomes fog, the mind becomes a maze. Still, the theory lingers. It reminds us that our grasp on truth is thinner than we'd like to believe, that much of what we call knowledge rests on assumption, memory, and collective agreement. And once those are called into question, the foundation trembles, not because we are wrong, but because we can never be entirely sure we're right. But maybe certainty is not the goal. Maybe the point of last Thursdayism is not to believe it, but to explore what it reveals. It shows us how deeply we depend on the past, how tightly we cling to our narratives, how easily we forget that every belief is a story built on trust. It invites us to loosen our grip, to sit with mystery, to live with the unknown, not as a threat, but as a space for wonder. There is something quiet and poetic in the thought that all of this conversation, this breath, this world, began just days ago. That we are walking through a story freshly written, yet filled with echoes of centuries. That we are new, even as we feel old. It casts the world in soft light like morning mist, where everything is familiar but strangely unreal. And perhaps that's the deeper truth. Not that last Thursdayism is real, but that it points to something real. That our sense of reality is always part illusion. That memory, history, and identity are fragile, reconstructed, prone to error. That what matters is not how long the world has existed, but how deeply we live within it. How fully we engage, knowing that certainty is always just out of reach. So, if the world was created last Thursday, what will you do with it? Will you mourn the loss of what never was? Or will you embrace the gift of what is, this moment, this mystery, this fleeting life that feels like forever, even if it's only been a week? The Evil God Challenge. Imagine, if you will, a god, omniscient, omnipotent, and ever-present. But instead of being all loving and good, this God is purely and perfectly evil. He created the universe not out of love, but out of malice. Every law of nature, every biological process, every human desire and pain, crafted with precision to maximize suffering. This being watches us not with compassion, but with contempt, and every moment of joy or peace we experience is either a cruel trick or a necessary step in deepening our ultimate misery. This is the thought behind the Evil God Challenge, a philosophical mirror held up to traditional theism, asking why belief in an all-good God is considered more reasonable than belief in an all-evil one. Proposed by philosopher Stephen Law, the Evil God Challenge doesn't argue that such a being exists. Instead, it asks a simple but unsettling question. If the existence of a good God is compatible with a world full of suffering, then why wouldn't the existence of an evil God be compatible with a world that contains joy? If we can explain suffering as part of a divine plan, tests of faith, opportunities for growth, punishments for sin, then could an evil God justify happiness as a means to cause deeper despair later? Couldn't pleasure be a cruel illusion, a tool of torment? At first, the idea seems absurd. We look around the world and see acts of kindness, beauty, love. Surely this cannot be the work of a malevolent creator. Surely these things point to goodness, not evil. But Law's challenge is not meant to promote belief in an evil God. It's meant to question our assumptions, to show that the same kinds of justifications used to defend a good God in the face of evil could be flipped and used to defend an evil God in the face of good. For example, when we see children suffer, we might say that God allows it to teach us compassion, that suffering deepens our souls, that it brings us closer to the divine. But if we lived in a world mostly of suffering, with rare glimpses of joy, could we not argue the opposite? That happiness is allowed by an evil God to make the pain even more unbearable? That brief moments of love exist only to be snatched away? That hope itself is the cruelest tool in the hands of a malicious creator? The Evil God Challenge reveals how much of theology depends on interpretation, on framing, on seeing what we want to see. A world of both suffering and joy can be read in many ways. It can be a test from a good God. It can be a trap from an evil one. It can be the accidental product of impersonal forces. The facts are the same. What changes is the story we tell about them. And this is where the challenge deepens. Because if belief in a good God is often grounded in faith rather than evidence, then the same must be true for an evil God. If we reject the idea of an evil deity because it doesn't match our moral intuitions, then we must ask, are those intuitions shaped by objective truth or by cultural expectations? If our idea of God is built more on desire than deduction, what does that say about the strength of the belief? The challenge is not cynical. It does not mock faith. It simply invites reflection. It asks why the existence of evil is such a problem for theism, and why the existence of good is not equally a problem for theism in reverse. It reveals that our tendency to explain away what doesn't fit our worldview is not unique to skeptics or believers. It is human. Some respond by arguing that good and evil are not symmetrical, that good is foundational and evil is a corruption, that a being could be all good in a meaningful way, but not all evil, that evil lacks the coherence, the creative force, the grounding that goodness provides. In this view, an evil God is not merely unlikely, it is logically incoherent. Goodness, they say, is necessary for intention, purpose, consciousness itself. Others respond more pragmatically. They argue that while both good and evil God hypotheses are logically possible, only one fits better with the world we observe. That while there is suffering, there is also an overwhelming drive toward cooperation, flourishing, and love. That evolution, history, and human progress all bend slowly toward meaning and kindness, not chaos and despair. That while evil exists, it does not seem to be the dominant force. But again, the challenge returns. How do we know we are not being deceived? If an evil God is cunning enough, could he not disguise his cruelty in the cloak of beauty? Could he not create a world where hope lingers just long enough to hurt us when it fails? Could he not make joy addictive so that its absence wounds more deeply? Could he not build in just enough meaning to make the emptiness more unbearable? The real weight of the evil God challenge lies not in proving anything, but in holding space for discomfort, in showing that our deepest beliefs are often rooted not in evidence, but in the stories we choose to tell, that when we look at the same world, we can see vastly different things, that two people can walk through the same landscape, one seeing a garden tended by love, the other seeing a trap laid by cruelty. And perhaps this is what makes the challenge so powerful. It doesn't argue against belief. It argues for humility, for the recognition that our interpretations of the divine are shaped by hope, fear, memory, culture. That the problem of evil is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mirror held up to our values. That faith, whether in a good God, an evil God, or no God at all, is always in some way a choice. But even in this mirror, something else emerges, a kind of clarity. Because while the evil God challenge shows that both good and evil can be used to explain the same world, most of us feel a pull toward goodness, toward compassion, truth, healing. And that pull is not insignificant. It may not prove the existence of a good God, but it shows the direction of our hearts. It shows the kind of beings we want to be. And maybe that is the answer, not to the challenge itself, but to the life it asks us to live. Whether or not a good God exists, we are here. Whether or not evil is written into the stars, we still choose. We still create. We still care. And perhaps, in the face of uncertainty, Those small acts of kindness and courage are themselves a kind of theology, a quiet declaration that, even if the world is ambiguous, we will not be. So if the evil God challenge lingers in your mind, let it, not to cast doubt, but to invite depth, not to shake belief, but to refine it, to remind us that the stories we tell about God, whether good, evil, or silent, are also stories we tell about ourselves. And in that telling, we shape the world. Not perfectly, not always clearly, but with intention, with care, with hope that whatever made this world, we can make something gentler inside it.